Okay, everybody, welcome to the October 20th Edina Transportation Commission meeting. Our first item is roll call. Sharon, do you want to lead the roll call?
Yes, I will. Member Bass, Member Braden, Member Nelson, Member Scholl-Davis, Member Thompson, Member Janevi,
Here.
Member McLevine, Member Hausch, Member Bonneville, Member Franzen, and Member Schreiger.
Thank you. Member Bass will be here shortly. Our next item is approval of the meeting agenda. If it's okay, I'd like to propose a couple of changes. I'd like to propose moving the Traffic Safety Committee report to after item D in reports and recommendations. And I'd like to add our Transportation Option Subcommittee update. Let's do that before Bike Task Force. Would that work for people? So that would be between F and G. I guess we'll take a motion to that.
Amend.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, that carries. The next thing we have is approval of minutes. Does anybody have corrections or changes to the minutes from our September meeting?
I'll move approval.
Second? Second? Okay, any discussion about the motion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, that passes. The next thing, because we moved the Traffic Safety Committee report, is community comment. And what we can do is we can take comment right now, or you can speak during the item that you want to speak about, whichever works for you. If you're here about the proposed bike boulevard, that will probably be an hour from now. So you're welcome to speak now if you want, or you're welcome to stick around, whichever works for you.
Well, let me speak now.
Okay. When you come forward, could you please state your name and address?
Members of the Commission, my name is Bob Betcher. I live at 5250 Grandview Square here in Edina, but I am here really as a representative of Edina Community Lutheran Church, which is located one block west of France Avenue on 54th Street. And the reason I'm here is that I would like to request of you consideration of several parking options on 54th Street. It is very important for the church that we park there for events during the week, and we are really a 7-day-a-week facility. And some of the proposals were to put bike lanes on both sides of the road. That would certainly restrict the parking that we have, and we already have a variance from the city to do the parking that we do, which actually runs from the creek on the west side of the church to Halifax on the east, and sometimes down Halifax when we have events at the church and services. So as you consider options for that section of your bike path, I would ask you to keep in mind the restrictions that we're under in terms of parking, and hopefully finding a solution that will both accommodate cars, bikes, and parking. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Right.
The first item under reports and recommendations is our new Assistant City Manager, Karen Kurt, is here to introduce herself and see what we do in person.
Thanks
Welcome.
for including me on your agenda. I appreciate the time. And I just wanted to give you a quick update on a little bit about my role. And one of my charges since joining the city is actually to work with our boards and commissions in a global sense to make sure that we're giving you all the tools that you need to be successful and that you're having a good experience because you're certainly giving us valuable time in your service. And so we've got several projects that we're working on that you're going to be seeing soon. One of which is actually a bylaw template. And I know that the ETC graciously sort of held off on their bylaws to give us some time to put the template together. And all of the staff liaisons, including Assistant City Engineer Sullivan and I, have been kind of working on a rough draft. And we think the next step will be to invite representatives from each of our commissions to come together and walk through it and see how it looks from your perspective. And then once we sort of adopt those modifications, then to forward it out to the commissions and boards to take a look at in terms of adoption. And Chair Janovi certainly put together a very thorough draft for the ETC that I borrowed generously from, so I wanted to acknowledge that. Another project that we have is actually a board and commission survey, which you'll probably see during the month of November, and we're going to send it out to all of our members and ask for your feedback in several areas. And then lastly, we're going to be putting together some training, hopefully early next year. That's one of the areas we'll be asking for feedback in the survey for you to give us some ideas about what you think might be helpful or might have been helpful when you join the commission. And so that's really what I had today, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you.
Well, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Are you going to stick around a little bit?
I am.
Yay. Okay. All right. Our next item is we have Jack Brose from HR Green and also working on with the Grandview Small Area Plan is one of the projects here in Edina he's working on. And some of us got to hear Mr. Brose last year give us a discussion of complete streets, and I still remember the film that he showed so well of, I think, San Francisco, was it? Like turn of the century. And how there were all these modes of transportation existing together. At the same time, the motor vehicles were going maybe 10 miles an hour, but that's still really, and the other thing that really stuck in my mind all winter was that slide you showed of how, that showed how overbuilt some roads are, that in the winter, the traffic pattern in the snow really shows what part of the road people are using, and the rest is all snowy still. So anyway. I appreciated that. So welcome tonight, and the discussion is France Avenue from a complete streets perspective.
And I know some people were here, maybe, and I see some new faces from the group. So I elected to try to blend and not just focus on France Avenue because this topic, this issue, if you would, has been emerging over the last a little more than a decade in the transportation industry. And I think that it's actually more comprehensive a change than the interstate system was when it came in 50 years ago. This is going to affect so many streets, whereas the interstate affected the higher volume, major highway connecting the whole country. Collectively, that is the largest piece of infrastructure ever built in the history of the world. That's going to set the table for the challenge for all the rest of our infrastructure from the rest of this point forward, because to maintain and expand and deal with those issues really affects everything. But there's many more miles of other streets. And I think most importantly, France Avenue, for example, and its future is being thought about, and this will hopefully take you to a point where you see what does complete streets, which is currently one of the terms you might have heard over years, context-sensitive design, context-sensitive solution, green streets, you're now living streets. They all basically come back to the same point. Integration of land use, transportation, how do you move, how do you access, circulate. But as we look at these roads, we're going to start to look at these in a little different sense. And what I'll just say as a professional that's worked for more than that decade, that what Complete Streets starts to do is it starts to move the emphasis from just vehicles, and I think you just heard in your public comment period, to find a new balance of moving in transportation, regardless of the mode now, and to really say that to be able to move on foot or bike or to use transit is a new balance that we're trying to strive. And so the history of the interstate and everything, as we'll get into, it's just a simple statement here that safe access for all users, ages, and abilities to move along and across the street. It's not a lofty goal, but I think as you get into these and you think about a France Avenue as we go through this, have we gotten there? Historically, maybe not. So this is a slide, could be France Avenue, except France has more lanes. So, you know, is that basic? I'm sorry? Yeah, the palm tree. So we share slides around the country. But what would make it more complete, and it doesn't necessarily, you didn't see that it went bigger, but it starts to change. And you can go even deeper. You start to look at land use changes that might influence the behavior and the needs of the modes. But it still has parking, but maybe you start to see it and feel that that wasn't a big change. But could you walk across that street a little more safely? Would you drive at a slower speed possibly? Some of these things are what we're looking for as we redesign. I talked about the interstate era. Back in that day, we were pretty focused. We had one mode of transportation that the engineering community focused on, and those marbles are a lot of technical marbles that we had to balance. And when I was a young engineer, my boss used to talk about, because we were developing standards, and as we went through all this, there was a lot of cases that didn't work. And he had a phrase that he got from his boss, which was, what do we do on a turnpike? There was no standards when we started this whole interstate game. And so we looked at the old plans. And eventually, as time has gone by, we developed standards. But you see that little ring on the bottom kind of said, stay in here. And we were able to balance the criteria in front of us, technical issues to move vehicles. We're going to come back to a similar slide but here's how this process worked. I see Ann here, so at council, I'm going to pick on you in a second. Here's what came out of this. It's a very standard approach. It's based on funding, federal law. We pick our functional classification. There's typically a couple of 3 categories. And you go in from there into the charts and the engineering standards, and we come back with all the design speeds and a cross-section, lane widths, all those things were pretty much dictated. It was pretty rote once we set it all in standards. It doesn't really work that well. And I think my council, to their credit, said, well, those 3 categories of arterial, so we've got a lot more. So we've got the A minor principal, we got A minor reliever, augmenter, expander, connector. Are we still talking about adding more? It's a system that's kind of hard to put everything in a box. It doesn't fit that well. Every road seems, in France, we'll talk about that, is not a simple road that you'll find anywhere else on the planet. Then what we would do is we would take traffic and we'd count it, we'd forecast it, and we'd do our analysis, and we'd determine what we call the level of service, usually during the peak hour, which might be 15 minutes in all reality. And this is how we would design a road. We would take a look at that, and that's that kind of red or pink wedge. But the reality is that we exclude weekends, because that's really not, the real problem was midweek. And then we forecast that over 20 years to make sure the investments that we do live for at least 20 years and function. The green part of the pie is where complete streets come in. What starts to happen the rest of the time? So are we considering that? Historically, we didn't. So how does a road work off-peak? So we make enough road to work during rush hour, and we live with we always have the consequences because rush hour. So that's one of those questions in the balancing that we're starting to re-question. So here's your France Avenue. What did I grab, 70th? I didn't pay attention. So that's the road that we designed that needed to handle that peak hour volume. So you see, as a lot of these photos, and I always pause in these presentations at this point, whenever I use aerial imagery, this is just from Google, Bing, whatever, where are the cars? A slide ago, I showed you a lot of green space on the pie chart. These things live forever once we build them. And so we need to start to understand, where are the cars? We had to do this. Can you walk across this? Can you bike through here? right? Can you wait for the bus? So these decisions were made, and I made these myself. I mean, this is a change in the industry. This is exactly what we would do. The new approach is going to start to question, is that the right balance? Did we have to have that, what we call a free right, so that in this case, I think it's north to east. So what if they didn't have that free right? That means the vehicle would have to slow down for how many seconds to turn right? Is that the right balance? Now that's a free-flowing movement. You want to walk across that. Is that the right balance? So those are the questions we're going to start to ask now. Here's a slide that you remembered. When we make these decisions, sometimes, again, 20 years in the future, maybe, we're all afraid of underdesigning a road. The question I say in this process, have we really underdesigned too many roads? We do. There are spots. Anybody drive southbound on 35W? Brand new. Is there a problem right there? Brand new. So there are some problems where we have to be careful. But in general, especially when you get off the interstate and lower speed roads, how many cars really travel on this road? That we predicted we need 2 left turn lanes, 2 through lanes in each direction, right turn lanes. I think it's pretty obvious that that's how many cars go through there. So as we put down, and the maintenance knows how much sand and salt to put down, so you kind of start to say, is there room to rebalance from the vehicle space to accommodate these other modes? And there's Ridgefield. They try to maintain the sidewalks. In certain areas, like I say, they try. So can we do better? I guess that's the desire. And in all of this, speeding is part of the issue on these. Well, this is a lot of different roads, Minnesota and Michigan roads specifically in this study. Anything above that diagonal line is called speeding. So this is the data from a National Cooperative Highway Research Program study that looked at, do we have a speeding problem in this country? Not rhetorically, but is there speeding issues in the community? Does this commission ever have speeding issues brought forth? We design big, open, wide roads. And there's the data that shows. Why is that important? When we try to balance and provide for that biker, that person walking, we call those pedestrians regardless, biking or walking. And we take a look at these 2 studies that were done. The one with the black bars, that's at 40 miles, 30 miles, and 20 miles. The dark black portion is your probability of getting killed. So the dark bar indicates statistically your probability of being killed in that collision. So at 40 miles an hour, you can almost show that there's about a 90% chance that you will get killed if the car is going 40 miles an hour when it impacts you. 30 miles an hour, it's about a 50-50. And 20 miles an hour. So why is speed important? The lower chart is broken down by age group, another Florida study. Just tells everybody who's younger in the room, you have a lot better chance than I do. So as you get older, we're not going to sustain that crash very well. So why is this important to manage speed? To consider that we have designed roads that have speeding problems. So it is a big concern when we try to put the mix in. So and this is trying to find a new balance that Complete Streets is looking for. Because here's what's really happening now. You see that there's a lot of modes. We've added a couple of different color marbles. Over time, let's call the green ones the environmental marbles. Back in the 60s, they told the transportation industry and a lot of other industries, you're not paying close enough attention to the environment. So environmental marbles, we had to juggle those. I remember the old drawings, they were swamps. and now they're wetlands. Very, very different attitude shift on that. And then here's the blue marbles. You talk about your plans in the living streets, I think is what you're calling it, living streets. That's the social, that's the land use. Again, this is happening over the last decade. And the research, as I just showed you, is part of that. And what's happening is there are new standards, and we're going to talk about some of those documents here in a minute. So the industry is going through a major shift, just like we did with the interstate era, saying that everything is changing and the standards are changing. MnDOT is changing standards. State aid standards are changing. Everything is starting to change because of the realization that the data has come in, and what we've done has been so focused on the vehicle. We've done really good, wide, fast, straight roads, but they don't accommodate the others. So here's that NEPA, this is the National EPA Environmental Protection Act, a lot of other things, environmental justice, impacts to low-income residents, Wetland Conservation Act, and now here comes the term complete streets. Now, so Minnesota did have a report and actually has a state policy. I'm sure you're aware of that. And so game is on. Now, I think this affects mostly the state projects, but cities, counties can act as they see fit at this point. And when you get, Tony's not here, Steve's not here, when you get into designing for these other modes, there are some things that become a lot different than just the historical design for a vehicle. So what this ramp tries to do is to try to get to the benefits. You know, in this coalition, I would say, of people that are trying to make a difference, you have partners like Blue Cross Blue Shield Minnesota. I asked them, geez, what are you doing in the transportation arena? And they say, well, we realize that handing out step counters and water bottles is not enough. 60% of the citizens in Minnesota are overweight. Major percentage are growing of obesity, even in the youth of our state, and that we recognize that the way we move has to change. And so how do we get there? And so across the bottom, and I'll admit that, or I wanted to give credit to Transit for Livable Communities, in that breaking this down, that if we went out and just did the legal ADA type changes in our system, ridership isn't really going to change. People aren't going to jump to the bus because there's a curb cut. Safety. You might start to see an impact that it is safer. There's some lighting, it's not so dark, there's no gaps in the sidewalk system. Convenience, all the way to advantageous. And this goes not just within this corridor, the right-of-way, but off the right-of-way. So if you could, when you go to your parking lot right here, for example, has a promenade through the center of the parking lot. Imagine that took you to the far side, to the street, where there was a bus stop. Would that encourage somebody to safely take the bus to the stop in front of City Hall and walk through the parking lot to your front door? And so at some point, you're riding your bike, the bike rack is in front. Excuse me, but maybe the Hummer's parked in the back row. Handicap, ADA parking, electric cars. Where is this going? I don't know. But it's the concept that we start to look at the right-of-way and the land use and come up with a synergy to say we need to make a change in the way we move as a country. In this model, this is part of the training. I do this training for MnDOT in this very topic. And this is the fundamental model that we try to promote, in that historically we only have worked with that technical column. Remember those color marbles? Here's the same colors. We need to start to look at the community and the regulatory issues as equal, maybe not equal, as part of a comprehensive, a new balance. Balance doesn't mean equal. But the consideration for these other elements, along with, within the technical, the other modes. So it's a land use driven, it's a community aspiration, quality of life, and how do you build a sewer? Yeah, we can connect those. We just did that across Richfield. We built a sewer. You follow the sewer from Edina to the airport along 75th and 76th. And revisioned. There is a Three Rivers Regional Trail. There is trees that are planted. There are bike lanes, in addition, sidewalks, crosswalks, because we had to build a sewer. So we need to look at those other aspirations as we build infrastructure, because we're only going to build something. There's only one solution in that model. You need to factor those other perspectives. So again, Complete Streets kind of brings it back into the modes. We talk a lot about modes, and so paying attention to the process is a big deal. The third bullet point, to me, I think is a very important one, is understanding how we move. And I'll have you stop and think about how we move on France, and we'll talk about that more specifically in a little bit. So travel mode versus circulating versus just trying to access. There's different behaviors that go with each of these. They all might be a car or a bike on the street, but if you're trying to travel to work, maybe you're making a couple of stops along the way. But those actual stops and getting out of your car, bike, walking into the front door and accessing that land. How does that work for you? So we need to understand it at all those levels, and what we're talking about here is doing more than less. For years I talked about this slide, so I get to introduce my props. So, and there you see it was promoted to be the December issue of the 2010 Highway Capacity Manual that finally came out mid-2011. For the first time in the Highway Capacity Manual, they've acknowledged the different modes. They have a formula for a multimodal level of service, a calculation that says, is your design working for bikes, peds, transit riders, and still work for vehicles? The Highway Capacity, first edition of that formula. It doesn't have an input for land use and some other things, but it's in here now. Things are moving. What's not out yet is the what we call the Green Book. It's the federal level. It's the highway design criteria, and that's also been for years on the verge of being republished. It will significantly shift guidance towards urban lane width, but it's not out yet. Another one that did finally come out is the Highway Safety Manual, first edition, which would do an analysis for us. They took thousands of crashes across the country and put attributes to why they had a crash. And now you can take a design attribute and predict the safety of a corridor. These things are changing our industry. The safety component of this, in this concept, they have this thought of nominal safety versus substantive safety. So to play with the words, let's start with substantive. Is it really safe? Very simple. Nominal safe goes back to that standards. Did we design it according to standards? It's a simple yes, no. I have a slide from, this is from the FHWA, but here's a slide where we take a look at a same street. Are there palm trees? I don't know. But here's an analysis of how this manual starts to change the world. So the existing condition in 3 different alternatives. 20,000 cars a day. It would experience, again, you could predict it now, the 26.3 crashes per mile. Here's a road that's just like that Complete Street. It's a little bit better. Starts to let you cross. Its experience predictive is 17.2. 8.6 for this design. We kind of channelized. So got the left turn lanes, not the center turn lanes. And this one on the right looks like a freeway, doesn't it? 4.2. So now the caution I would just say is when we're talking about rebalancing, you know, an engineer could tell you real quickly that 4.2 is a lot better than 8.6, which is better than 17.2, which is better than the 26 we get today. But in rebalancing, we're going to start to ask return on investment, and how does this work from the other modes? So you start to hopefully see that 8.6 isn't significantly different than 4.2 when you start to look at other factors and what they might get. So what is the data point? It is return on investment. It's not clear for us. But this is the kind of change that's facing our industry. Other study that was done, I told you that the federal documents are coming back with amazing results on what happens on urban roadways. And the narrower lanes have been shown to improve safety on urban settings. I could have you contact MnDOT's traffic office to see what they would say on this very topic. And I'll tell you that what they've told me is we have to stop designing these wide urban roads. We have to control the speeding. Yeah, wait till I show you Madison. It changes driving behavior. And so it is that safety is attributed to the speeds. And how do we engineer roads where they don't have a speeding problem, especially in the non-rush hour, which is the largest percentage of the time. Largest percentage. In fact, the chart I showed you was not time, it was the number of vehicles. It was the number of vehicles that go on that road. The vast majority, 90%, rule of thumb, travel other than rush hour. What is their experience? So quickly, we have to design as different mode designers. So it's not just a vehicle designer, we have to become transit designers. I personally don't know any roadway designers that have designed transit systems. As I've tried to reach into that world, I grabbed a list. They consider a lot of different things than a roadway designer considers. As to how a transit system works, how do you gain access, what's a good bus stop. So they look for a lot of different things than we do. We usually just coordinate and say, where's the bus stop? How big do you want a shelter? Or how much do you need? It's like rats. Bicycling, again, it's just been amazing. As I worked on this project across the street in Richfield, it was clear to us that biking is not one category at all. You have commuter bikers, very serious, competent, highly skilled bikers that want to travel mode. You have recreational bikers, you got the big wheel. So how are you accommodating that? That is not one accommodation. That's why we ended up with a sidewalk, on-street bike lanes, and a multi-use trail in Richfield. And we got that to fit in 60 feet of right-of-way. There's a punchline coming. Pedestrians are the same thing. There is no such thing as a simple pedestrian accommodation. In the training class that we do for MnDOT, we have an ADA session. The visual, the hearing, the cognitive, they meet with us. We bring them into the fold for the training session, and they end every session discussing the battle between what somebody who's low vision and somebody in a wheelchair needs, because they're different accommodations. And so how do you accommodate these different bikers, these different challenges? The short answer is you need more room to accommodate these. And so how do you get to that? Where does that room come from? So here's a project that was done in Wisconsin. U.S. Highway 151, if you're familiar with Madison, this takes you right to the Capitol. I'll caution you, this is not France Avenue, but we'll talk about and compare and contrast. But here they had a problem, and again, France Avenue doesn't have this problem. The pavement was in dire condition, absolutely dire condition, needed to be reconstructed. And the pressure for biking, in this case biking parking, it was huge. And so they went to the standard approach, and they are not, by the way, a complete street state. They are not a context-sensitive solution state. But what they were told as engineers, we can't use our state guidance. It won't work. Use the federal guidance, the old federal guidance, current federal guidance, and go be engineers. Use your judgment, think, solve the problem. We have to do something. This is what they came back with. Effective 10-foot lanes, 3 in each direction, not always a right turn lane. Sounds a lot like France, doesn't it? Maybe the 10-foot doesn't. Median, left turn lanes. Sometimes they had double lefts, whatever it needed. Bike lanes, parking, and they got it to fit. That was all per the federal guidance. That's the picture of that plan view. Note the school, the median barrier to control crossings safely. It's a widened crossing. It's the newer signal designs that actually let you know by sound. In this case, it's safe to cross Washington Avenue. It's spoken at this signal. Colored pavement changes for the visually impaired. That's a huge component of what they're looking for, the contrast. They just went and thought. They didn't follow standards. They did what they knew they had to do. And this is a different crosswalk. Can I go back? The crosswalk on the right is wider than the crosswalk on the left. Because when they were making decisions as engineers, the other one's not by a school. That's by the school. So it was a very mindful design process across all the length of this corridor. It wasn't a typical section A answer that they came out from the chart. From the functional class to the speed limit to the lane widths and everything being dictated. So how does this work? We talked about how does this affect traffic? And this was, and I'll tell you up front, I didn't take these pictures. I was driving. Took a series of photographs one Saturday morning. Posted speed is 35 miles an hour on this stretch of road. Based on the timestamp on the photos, we averaged 25 miles an hour on this nearly 4-mile trip length. Saturday morning, now let me show you what was happening. These are 10-foot lanes. Good Lord, are you crazy? Yes. Apparently I am, because here's what happens. So in this first upper left photo, and these are just kind of in a couple of the sequence, 6 out of 8 of these vehicles traveled together for that entire length. We moved as a group, and I'll tell you why. These are 10-foot lanes. You don't feel comfortable at all. It's a completely different driving experience. I'll tell you that everybody I've talked to who's driven on this road says, wow, that is uncomfortable. So what happens is that they come to the traffic light, and you all pack in. Red light. Green light. You are not comfortable traveling next to a door handle. It's too close. It's creepy. So we hit the space behind. We slow down. We find that now we're not behind or adjacent to that car. But if there's some reason the bus is going to stop or they're going to turn right and they slow down, we slow down. All of a sudden the behavior is everybody's much more aware, everybody's slowing down. And the reason I bring this is because my daughter went to school there. I drove this road several times, and I said, what have they done here? This is a uniquely different driving experience. I called the city. They love it. I called the state. They wish they had more lanes. All right. Yeah, up to the Capitol. You see the Capitol there? I think my next slide will do that. I love those questions. Sometimes I predict that. According to the traffic data I have been able to gather, the same source of data, that you can take a look at the range of traffic that France Avenue's had over the last so many years, 5 to 10. And that's roughly 30 to 33, 34. And Washington Avenue that you just looked at carries about 40 to more closer to 45, depends on where you're at. And I will tell you, as we start to talk more and more about France Avenue, that that Washington Avenue is, I think, distinctly different than France Avenue in that it truly is a road that all four of us went 4 miles together. We all traveled along that route. France Avenue, I'll have you think, if that's true, how long you drive on France Avenue or anybody else ever drives on France Avenue. But what I've plotted these traffic volumes against is a series of planning level roadway design criteria that would say from the left, if you only had 2 lanes with no turn lanes, how many cars can you handle before it fails? 10,000. So you have France Avenue currently is the second column to the right. So it's a 6-lane with right and left turn lanes. And the level of service that we talk about, A is like there's nobody out there, it's great. At the very top, there's not a bar, it's just above the chart, it's F. Just like in school, that's not good. So from a planning level, you're probably around a C. C is way good. So I don't know if France Avenue, in your opinion, reflects that or not. This is a planning tool. But are you congested? You can't get from 494 to Crosstown. It's just all messed up. Can't get there from here. C would say that even rush hour, yeah, you can get there. So I don't know if that's true or not, but the example in Madison is got more traffic than what you have on France Avenue. So now we talk specifically about France, how it works and what we accommodate, I guess, is a question I would say it works in a network. You know, and you have to consider all the modes when we do this, but I find historically, even the last study done on France Avenue that I found, which was the planting schemes along the edges, ended at Minnesota Drive. And I find this to be quite often how studies are done. And I couldn't figure out why it ended at Minnesota. You know where that is? Just a block north of 494. And I'm thinking to myself, what kind of study would stop a block from 494? It's the corporate limit, isn't it? City limit. Wow. I think you better throw that logic away right out of the gate. So it's part of a larger network. So I look at things like this. I don't see corporate limits at all. I see roads, I see connections. So anybody who looks at France Avenue in this balancing process needs to start to understand this road in its own network. You got the Viking Promenade, you've got York, you've got 3 interchanges up on Crosstown that feed this area. One on the south. That's, okay, now we're starting to understand the network that you're trying to solve the problem. And how can you find solutions? I mentioned the promenade, one of the most successful, Tony's still not here. I can ramble on, so take Tony's time. So the Greenway project is one of the most successful bike projects in the country. Now, I'm on the listserv for the Lake Street Council, for all those businesses along Lake Street. You want to talk about a perspective of disconnected from land use? You have no idea what business activity is going on if you're in the trench, flying 100 miles an hour, getting to where you want to go. So there's a big disconnect between land use and that interstate for bikes. So you need to look at that. How do I know, okay, hypothetically, and I haven't ridden a bike through either of these corridors, but if I was on York and I wanted to get to the library, I think I drive to it, so I know how I would find it. But if I was on the promenade, would I know where the library is? It's disconnected. See, so these are the things that we need to start to justify the decisions that we make at that kind of level. Regardless of mode, how do they connect land use to these decisions and work through a network? Traffic patterns. So I had you start to think about your trip. In my family, we call it, we're going to France. I don't know what you say in your house, but we go to France. I've never gotten on at 494 and gone to Minneapolis. because I'm going someplace on France Avenue between Crosstown. And if I'm going on to, Southdale or Galleria, I'm probably coming from the Crosstown. And if I'm Centennial Lakes or something, I come from 494. I live in Eden Prairie. How many people travel from south of 494 to north of Crosstown? To answer your question, what is the throughput need on France Avenue? It's got 33,000 cars a day. But what are they doing? Are they traveling, circulating, or accessing? And if you want to design for that, and I'm going to just hypothetically say that there's more circulating and access, so how many lanes go through and how many lanes turn? Because what we do at the intersection is give priority to the various legs. And if you want to give priority for somebody to walk, and I'll just tell you about 2 or 3 years ago, the federal guidance said that we're aging and we walk slower. So the traffic signal calculations have to provide more time. So one way to mitigate that is shorten the crosswalks. Okay, that Madison example, they were about 100 feet. France Avenue right now is 120, 130. That's a significant additional time to cross the street. So how do you rebalance those intersections? Understand what's the priority that France Avenue, this is nothing like Madison in that regard. Madison is a route that mainly has a through component. So does France Avenue have that balance? I can't tell you today, but I think it doesn't, based on my use of going to France. So it is a unique roadway. It's not like any other roadway. It doesn't have any process that's standard to get you to an answer. It has a process of thinking and connecting to the land use, balancing all the different modes. It's a unique roadway. They all are. The challenge for the industry is we have to design every road. To some sense, yes. There isn't a standard that works for all these streets. It has to work in a network. You have to think through the unique traffic patterns, specifically the church. That was very telling in what has to happen on that Wooddale. 54th, I'm sorry. I mentioned Lake Street. Again, the street was designed. We, as engineers, find it first the most comfortable thing to say, let's go design where the bikes can be in the trench. That's good, we're done. They're not, we don't have to accommodate them. Well, how do they access back to Lake Street? How do they park when they get there? How do they circulate? How do they know? The promenades, same thing. How do they connect? How do they know where they're at? Doing an off-peak analysis will show you, like in Madison, can you cross the street? Is that the right balance? So off-peak, what is the answer for the cars is typically there is no problem except for speeding. What about crossing? What about riding your bike on a Saturday morning? So that's what the off-peak analysis starts to put in your metrics of, does this alternate A or B work better for you? Does it serve land use better? That's a component. Design flexibility. I'll use Richfield again as an example for that. If you really go through a process that takes you to that level of understanding that the church right here on my project is very important in my design. It's not any place else. It's right here. Design flexibility. When we had the sewer project, Met Council, MCES sewer, from serving Edina and Richfield. So the city of Richfield helped them find an alignment that was best suited to their needs for street infrastructure reconstruction. So they started to find a win-win. And then Three Rivers Park District wanted in. Can we put in our regional trail? And as I mentioned before, it all sounds good until you say we only have 60 feet of right-of-way. And we want boulevards and trees, and how's that all going to fit? It doesn't fit. Especially when you say, well, I got a multi-use trail. It's wonderful, Mr. Biker. Like the commuter biker tells Jack, I will never, you know how many driveways? I will never. It's off from the intersections. I will never use your trail. So then we have to have on-street bike lanes. So then lightning hits, so I call Three Rivers, and I say, I know it's a regional trail. I know you've got 12 feet and 3 feet on either side. It's a multi-use, big deal thing. Regional trails, we got our criteria, we have our standards. But I have a question. Since everybody has told me they will, the commuter bikers have told me they will never use your trail. So they're not on your multi-use now. They're on the street. I've got bike lanes on the street. Can I go 8 and 2 and 2 like a city trail? Let's call you back. I think we were in the same meeting, and they called us back. That's how long it took them to rethink. And they said, you know, that's a good point. 8, 2 and 2. Because that standard was driven off of those commuter bikers zipping along and a stroller. Nah, you're not going to have that. Go for it. It fit. Take a trip. So design flexibility is the key. I think I'm done other than to say Madison is in Wisconsin. They were told by their commissioner, make it work. We're not in Wisconsin. Any cheers? Oh, no, I'm sorry. But there's a lot of process. Engineering community is changing. It is such a wide sweeping change, then people are at different points. Like I said, state aid is changing their rules. I think they're publishing the draft this month. It's just like the new Green Book. It's not out yet. MnDOT has been in a nearly year-long process of looking at their standards. It's all changing because of this. It's hard to make these changes because people don't have the experiences of how does it affect the through lane? How does it affect the safety? Because we haven't done this. You know, so it's just like at the beginning of the interstate area. We didn't know. So we're going to do and we're going to try and hopefully be flexible and adapt. You know, will we under-design a road? I'm sure we'll do that. We do it today still. But anyway, it's a challenge to get it through a process, especially now. But it's all changing, and so that's kind of the message I'm going to leave you with. So whenever France needs to be real, could it be a more complete street? Yeah. And so, because it was designed the way we used to design, and the industry's changing. So I think with that, I will just open if there's any questions or comments.
It put the France Avenue into one of the categories, second from the right. But you also later said that France Avenue from the crosstown to 494, traffic was about 33,000, I think. Do those two things conflict with each other? In other words, are we over capacity on France Avenue because of that?
No, so the green bar goes from 30,000 to 35 plus. I don't know. It's a graphic. So about 36,000, let's say.
Oh yeah, I see it.
And so the second column to the right, you're in the middle of it someplace. So if you are towering above it, so if you take any of these to the left, 2 lane with any kind of 3 lanes, it doesn't work. 4 lanes, then the middle columns to the right then start to go 4 lane, and you actually nip one column, and then all of a sudden, 4 lane divided with right and left turn lanes, level of service D. So I don't know if we've gone through what level of service D might mean, but it's all based on delay.
That's what you're designed to, isn't it?
It would be acceptable. You know, I think, you know, Hennepin County's not here. They will chime in on that. But this is a planning tool. So it starts to say, well, D, then E, but it doesn't say F anymore. 4-lane road with turn lanes. You know, so you have a 6-lane and even 8-lane at the southern end. And so when you get over there, you start to say, it's in that column, that means it's potentially workable. There's a lot more engineering that would be needed to be done, and it really works at intersections. And I'm just kind of guessing that the intersections are the problem on France, turning on and off. Now, people do have to go through that signal because now they're on, they got to go through the next one. But they just got on at the one before. Mm-hmm. I look at, back to that one with palm trees, or what other example from FHWA, where they talked about different options. And you see in the upper existing, you start to see more driveways all over the place, left and right, and we start to control things. I notice on France Avenue, access to the land, there's a lot of mid-block, right in, right out, as we would call it. So, seems like a good decision to me. Because now you've got two options, to turn in and turn out. So would we get rid of that if somebody told you that you could reduce 0.2, 1.3 crashes per mile? I would hope you would say, well, no, I think it really allows people like a backup to turn in mid-block or to turn in at the next signal. So that's kind of the unique question answer that we need to do as we design with this tool.
Yeah, I had a question about the new standards that are coming out. You said that the highway capacity manual has some new ones. And the Green Book, you're expecting also to do that. And state aid, as we're looking at theirs, and MnDOT. And I'm wondering, are the new standards, are they going to be pretty much the same across the board, or are they going to be as maybe stringent or dogmatic as they've been in the past, or are there going to be more room for flexibility depending on agency and implementation, or kind of what are they going to be like? Do you know?
They're being developed in one technical column. I'll just share, to answer your question, I'll share, I sit on MnDOT's advisory committee for complete street issues. This topic came up as they were presenting what was happening for the state aid, and then MnDOT presented what was happening at the change in standards. So I asked the question that in this three-column world of community-based design, we promote and we teach to include the community, to include the landowners, the regulatory authorities in the problem statement, the definition. And so I asked, how are they including anybody other than their closed circle in their new standards? And they said, we're not yet. Well, maybe not yet. We'll go back and think about that. And I've heard since then that they are talking, at least at MnDOT, of opening that advisory group beyond the MnDOT people. Because what do you think their comfort zone is? So when we move to new standards, it's like, you think they're going to take a big step? Say, wow, we got to be more flexible, or do you think they're going to just kind of nudge it? We were pretty close. So I just say this is the first edition of this manual. This is the first time the highway capacity manual has a level of service that includes biking as a real thing, walking, transit. So to answer your question, I guess I would just say we're now starting to decide that we need to make a change. I think these first rounds of changes won't be much different, I'm sad to say. At the same time, it's a big difference at the federal level. So they are going off these charts, this slide here, that understands what's happening with their research. And so just like when Wisconsin was told to put away your local manuals, use the federal guidance, they could design that Washington Avenue with their judgment and their decision making. So that's always out there. So if you need a variance, and I think on my last slide I did try to say, if you wanted to use a 10-foot lane in Minnesota, you will have to do a bunch of engineering and design variances, design exceptions, and your justification hopefully is based on the land use input, the connections, the need for multimodal service in a community. And hopefully your design exception is not just technical written, but it talks more sophisticated about the holistic design of transportation.
Yeah, just another question on that capacity or the amount of traffic along France, the 30 to 36,000. Is that fairly consistent from Crosstown down to 494, or I guess does it would?
Further work would be not needed. I have on Google the ability to check periodically traffic counts. So it's based on the data source that Google Earth has embedded in its data. So I can only pick a couple of data points. And so a real process needs to do all the traffic work necessary along the corridor. I don't know, does the city have? It's really a county road, but.
It's a county roadway, but there is lesser volumes of traffic towards Crosstown, and the volumes increase as you work your way to 494.
See, we come from Eden Prairie to go to France. We use 494 a lot.
All right, are there any more questions? Thank you so much. My mind is full of information to digest. That's extremely helpful.
Tony's here.
Yep.
Well, he'll let me have a shameless plug. We did a study funded by Tony's organization using the federal funds to encourage walking and biking. It was administered also through the Metro Transit group. And in this, what we did is we tried to find low cost, high value improvements that would provide better access for pedestrians and biking to the bus stops. Specifically bus routes that feed into Minneapolis based on the funding criteria. And the southern part of France has a bus route that we did look at. And so in this study that we did, February 2009 is when it's published, tried to work with all the communities around Minneapolis, trying to find these improvements to, for example, sidewalk gaps, crosswalks, lighting, different things that like a transit designer might look for. That would improve ridership. And so just so you're aware, this study was also done. I think there's so many studies done that people don't always know they're out there. So.
Thanks for mentioning that, because I actually just ran across that Googling this past week. And it does in the 70th going south, it recommends crosswalks. You know, there's that famous transit stop by Byerly's where people get dropped off in a snowdrift. And when you talk about transportation and land use and how you're, when you mentioned if you're on the promenade and you want to go to the library, how will you even know how to get there? On France Avenue, for example, when you have sidewalk gaps and lack of crosswalks, how do you know how to get from point A to point B if you're on bike or on foot? And so that is, I think, one of the goals of looking at how do we balance the needs. Yeah, it's hard, but I think we're up for it. Oh, Nathan has something.
One question, I guess, on the crash prediction model. Do you think that's going to be something that we'll start seeing in specifications for standards? That they'll use it as an actual criteria for road design?
It's a very massive, comprehensive tool, so it's not going to pop out real quick that everybody's using it. But it will provide substantive safety data because I'll just tell you, it seems that there's two major challenges to these changes. One is safety. I think, in my experience in working with the engineering community, they mean cars, safety for cars, not crossing the street, not have any of these other things that are called safety. And so safety is a big challenge, and so any work that is going to challenge the standards should be guided by the safety manual as a backup. I think it's hard for the engineering community to walk away from the new safety manual. And the other is a legal question that has, if we're not following standards, what's the legal implications of that? And so there's a couple of unresolved components, but safety is always one of the top challenges. If we do that, is it going to be safe? The tool is out here now, but it's brand new and very, I brought you one volume, there's 4 or 5. And then there's a whole program, I think there's 40 hours or more training to learn how to run the software, but it's out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, the next item on our agenda is the TLC Phase 1 Bike Boulevard. And Jackie, want to give an introduction? And also, I want to welcome Tony Hull. Thank you for stepping in from TLC. So Jackie, you're going to give us kind of an update of where we stand right now.
Thank you, Chair. To give a quick overview, on October 6th, we invited over 670 individuals to come down to Public Works Building and take a look at the proposal presented from the Engineering Department with the help of Steve Clark from Transit for Livable Communities to engage the initial process with the residents of what bike boulevards are and this funding source that we have along 54th, Wooddale, and Valley View, what that might look like. At that time, we had about 38 households or so of the 670 that showed up that evening to talk about it, listen to what we had to say, and made a lot of good comments that evening. I think there was a couple of Transportation Commission members there, and I think everyone kind of walked away knowing that the residents that at least were there were not afraid of the bike boulevards. However, they were concerned of the parking, much like you heard from the resident earlier this evening, what that might do to the front of their home, or what that might do to their business and or their operation along there. So that was something that was kind of the takeaway from the night's meeting. Quickly, I'll say we're moving forward that the first step was to have the open house. Second step was to talk about it here tonight at Transportation Commission and get additional correspondence from individuals, which we haven't received much other than the one verbal here tonight. And then ultimately, next step is to go to council on December 6th with some kind of a with the public hearing on December 6th to talk a little bit more detail about the plan and what it might look like as we implement the Phase 1, which would be 54th, Wooddale, and Valley View. With that, I think there were some additional comments and questions that were a presentation maybe from TLC as well. I don't know how you wanted to proceed.
In the packet, we had the comments, a compilation of the comment cards. So, and you were at the meeting too. The comments, the written comments reflect what I heard in the room. And then also the packet has the boards that were shown that night. Is that correct?
Correct.
And if you remember back in, and I have too many pieces of paper in front of me. Okay, back in August, we sent a letter. We went through this project, and we sent a letter to our city manager, who then forwarded it to TLC. And the one part of the route that we didn't say clearly bike lanes or no bike lanes, the one part was Wooddale. And so I think it was after that the TLC board met and in their resolution proposed some ideas for Wooddale. One of them, sort of the obvious one that people were aware of, remove the parking, and then there is room for 2 dedicated bike lanes. But then a couple of creative other options that would allow parking to be retained on that stretch. And we're just talking about 54th south to Wooddale, but probably 50th to Valley View on Wooddale, but 54th to Valley View on Wooddale is the focus. And so 2 of the more creative options were retaining the parking, removing the center line, the center stripe right now, and putting in advisory lanes or shared lane markings, maybe with colored pavement or something. And here we have, is it 14th Street?
Yeah, it's 14th Street and Minneapolis, a recent treatment for the bipolar roadway.
Tony, do you want to come up? And because we haven't had a chance at our meeting in August, we didn't really have a chance to learn a lot about advisory lanes, and it's kind of a new concept for Minnesota, I think. And now that there are some actually being utilized, it maybe tell us how they work and what kind of feedback you're getting.
Yeah, certainly. And the ones you see before you are the new project, which is part of a longer facility that's on 14th, 15th, and 16th Street along the south portion of downtown Minneapolis. And essentially, advisory bike lanes are creating bike space that the bicyclists can use in a place where you really can't fit a bike lane, or where it may be less appropriate to try and use sharrows because of other constraints. And essentially the message is very simple. The motorist is able to drive in that advisory bike lane all the time, with the exception when that bicyclist is present. So if the bicyclist is in there, then you need to either wait to get around when traffic's good, or yield that right of way. These are actually extremely common now in Europe. It's actually a very standard design, and experience shows that they work really well on moderate volume streets, streets with under 6,000, under 5,000, essentially streets where you don't encounter so many conflicts with vehicles constantly. If you get up to higher volumes, that's when you want the center line to sort of define space, so you're not doing that. However, the concept itself, besides the paint, is really not that different than what you might expect on a lot of your other low volume or residential streets when you have parking on both sides. Oftentimes when you're coming down the street, there's not very comfortable space for cars to share, and so you courtesy yield as you come through. And so one of the other things about these types of treatments is they also can have some traffic calming elements, because it's, as opposed to the center line, which gives you your space that you can just sort of dominate and go down, this leaves you sort of in the center of the roadway. When oncoming traffic, you realize now you've got to be making that accommodation. So, and so far, again, these treatments in Minneapolis have been out for, geez, I want to say maybe 2 months now. But so far, nothing bad has happened from that. We haven't heard any real specific negative comments from the city of Minneapolis or from residents there. We are actually doing, because these are new, they're actually doing an FHWA experiment, and so we've been working with them. We did a bunch of video data collection beforehand. We'll be going out and doing follow-ups in the spring and summer of next year to really analyze and make sure that all the operations out there are handled well. But I don't know. It does seem to be something that is an effective tool in terms of finding better ways to try and accommodate more users on a street. So, I guess if that's, I can take any questions about it or discussion.
Well, I wonder, Jack, do you have that picture that is, it's a blurry picture, but, okay. So that shows with the bicycle markings how it looks. And, yeah. Do people have questions about how that might work?
So this picture shows one parking lane and then 2 advisory bike lanes, and is that what we're considering for that section of Wooddale, one parking lane?
I think this one. Does this one have 2 parking lanes?
Oh, yeah, you're right. There is a very fuzzy line over there.
Yeah, you can't really see. But Wooddale right now has parking only on the east.
Okay.
So that would be retained. And then I think the center section here is something like 14 feet, at least in part of it, or does it vary a lot?
Yeah, I'm having trouble. I'm assuming Steve took that picture,
Yeah,
as
he
nice
took
as
that.
it is. But yeah, there are several sections of varying length, and anywhere from 14 to even 18 feet. But essentially, it's because once you go below 10, or even really on state aid streets, 11 feet for the lanes, if you're going to have a center line, you actually have to create that space. In this case, it gives you that flexibility. I think 14 feet probably would be that lower threshold. You wouldn't want to go below that unless you were maybe on like an under 1,000 type of street that was really more like, would operate more like an alley.
So you're saying that if you don't have the center line, it doesn't require a variance on a state aid street because the shared space is not defined? or the lanes
Yeah,
are
I'm going
defined?
to yield to Jack on this to have more expertise on it. But I think it's my understanding, I know Steve's a bit more of an expert on that, but essentially lane widths are established with actually marking lanes. And so if you don't have the center line, you're not actually held to marking out that distance at 11 feet or what have you. Does that sound reasonable?
So I was looking at the boards, and on Wooddale, the boards didn't show the option, but if you take the 32-foot we have a 36-foot section, and then we have two 32-foot sections. And by my very basic calculation, I got a 16-foot center with 5.5-foot advisory lanes if you want to keep an 8-foot parking. Is that the state aid parking requirement? I see Jack nodding. Okay. So if you didn't want to ask for a parking variance, you could keep the 8-foot parking, which provides a little bit maybe of a buffer by having wider parking, and then still have two 5-foot advisory lanes and a 16-foot through lane. Does that sound
I'm adding
like
it up in my
something
head,
that?
so yeah, I'm looking at Jack here because I'm sure
I
he
used a
knows this.
calculator. Did you find that, has there been much of a learning curve, or have you found that the people who are using this they're pretty experienced already?
You know, it's interesting, and I've only been out a few times just to do some observation since the treatment, and actually even in bicycle and drive on it. And I really didn't notice any specific behaviors. I did notice that cars on their own were sort of just staying towards the center, which when there's not traffic is good. It's keeping them away from the parked cars. In the sections on 14th where it is, there's also a lot of people who just cross mid-block, so that actually is a little bit nicer for the pedestrians. The bicyclists were naturally following that, although I was looking at the pre-treatment, and they were actually following that before the marking, so they were actually still, and just given that condition of that street, using that same area. So to my knowledge, I haven't been able to witness sort of this scenario where the bicycle is coming and there's two cars coming at the same time and how the yield works. But my impression is that's somewhat of an intuitive thing operating. So
I think it's kind of like what we have already. We have a lot of streets in town that don't have a center line, and fortunately, vehicles will give a cyclist a wide area. And also when you have a dotted center line. And I guess that's the other question. Why not just have a dotted center line? Because it would confuse people with the advisory?
yeah,
lines
and well, the
or
MUTCD
dash?
would sort of set that up. So then those would be lanes again, and it would be an invariance, and plus that would then set that up as it's, it'd be a passing zone. So, the dotted center line, as it's used for separating traffic, the yellow line, is different than what the dotted white line would be in terms of the bike lane and the communication that it's actually providing. So, and I keep looking over to you, Jack, because I know I'm pretty good on the MUTCD, but if anything goes out of line, you just jump in and say, correct.
Chair, there's a place that Edina uses this that I think is confusing, even though I've driven it probably about 500 times. And that's if you're at Valley View Road, just west of 100, I'm sorry, Vernon Road, just west of 100, next to Grand View, the Grand View development, and you want to go through the intersection going to the north. And that road eventually turns west. But before it does, at the end of the gas station, there's this type of marking, just like what we have here, this advisory bike lanes. What's confusing about it is education. I'm not educated and haven't been, and I think 90% of the public is not educated how to use an advisory bike lane. Like, do I go into it or don't I? Do I stay out here in this lane and make the right so I can take a wide sweeping right to go down the hill? You know what I mean, where that is? goes down.
Yeah, so you're talking about the turn lane by the Holiday Station if you're
Right.
going to take a right down the
right.
hill to, on Brookside.
Brookside.
Yes.
And I think what we have there is the dash line is there to signal that cars can move into there to make the right-hand turn, and I would agree, I don't think people understand it.
Right.
On Wooddale, it would be straight, and which I think it would help.
And I'm not specifically familiar with that, but I think if I'm understanding you right, it's essentially where the bike lane is along the travel lane, and when the turn is, it's actually then you have what they call the Pegatrack, which is the dash, and essentially, and that's actually very standard. That's how it's supposed to be put in the manual, and that's essentially the blend zone. So that's giving more information to the bicyclists as you approach there that this is where you can expect the cars to come across. And sometimes it's accompanied with signage to remind the motorists that when you're getting over to the right, yield to the bike that's in the lane. And some communities now have started to use actually the green paint to basically do a highlighted conflict zone. In fact, a few of the Minneapolis projects, including the new bike lanes they have on Blaisdell, one at Lake, they're using that to sort of see if that improves the intuitive operation of vehicles and bicyclists at those locations.
Yeah, I think the problem there is that as it turns into interlocking there really isn't room for any lane, so there's no striping, and it just goes away at that point.
Right.
I think that's a little bit of the confusion there. But my question was really, is there any signage that goes along with this, or I don't see any signs on this part of the road.
Well, you know, in with Minneapolis, they're using a version, I think, of just some of the bike symbol. I don't know if they're using any, like here you have, I don't know if they're actually using any of the bike lane signage that you would. However, there are a number of options to use, essentially to provide signage for that, and I don't know if at this detail, the Wooddale, if that's been looked into in terms of just doing the treatment. One of the things is that these are generally on the lower volume streets in the character, so you sort of do want it to be a more benign treatment. You don't want it to be too conspicuous. I'm sort of the theory that the more you put markings and signs on the street, the more you send a message that it's a higher use street and higher volume, and so that can sometimes encourage people to drive faster or get more traffic. But it is something to definitely consider because, and particularly in the beginning when you bring something that's new to the area, there is to be expected a learning curve, and so there may be several ways to consider education and even interim signs to just sort of give some instruction to folks to say, you know, bicyclists will have the right of way when they're in the lane, be sure to yield, you know, something of that nature.
What is the volume on Wooddale in this section?
I may have that. I did pull up some volume maps just before I left the office.
Is this, I guess my real question, is this appropriate for that section of road?
Yeah, everything on Wooddale is under 5,000, and 5,000 would be where you start to say, consider the center line. I think the standards for it are it's required when you're over 6,000. Is that right, Jack? Oh, I just haven't yet.
I think Wooddale is under 4,000. 3,600, 3,800, something like that.
So we only need the variance if we want to shrink the parking lane? Is that correct?
That's what I'm hearing tonight. Does that match what you're thinking, Chuck?
We only need the variance if we shrink the parking?
As Mr. Brose mentioned earlier, the engineering studies are yet to come on a project like this one, and I wouldn't stand here this evening and say that a variance is not necessary. This is something that's new, and it is gaining momentum, but as Mr. Brose had mentioned earlier, there's some lag in the different departments within MnDOT and the state aid, and at this point, I guess we're cautiously moving forward with some of these, and we'll be asking those kind of questions as we move forward. We've had some problems on 70th Street where we've have started down this road and have had to take some 90-degree turns in order to get back on track and get into the variance process with the state. So we would certainly go into this very cautiously. At this point, I'm not willing to say that a variance would not be needed. I guess the flip side is when you submit a plan set to MnDOT and it doesn't have a center line, that's a red flag to them, and the questions would be asked. So as much as it's from our broad brush approach that it's not necessarily needed, when if you don't put a center line, well, then it's not defined as a lane. I don't know that everyone within the MnDOT organization agrees with that statement. They would say, well, you built a road and you didn't stripe it. Well, how are you going to stripe it? That's a question that would be asked, and there's still some of that thought process there. As we're working towards these newer designs, that's becoming more and more prevalent within the state, but I don't know that everyone's there yet. And so in order to make sure that we are on an appropriate timeline, we don't take a misstep, we'd certainly be asking those questions as we move forward.
It's certainly promising, I guess, that the precedent set with MnDOT having the approval for what Minneapolis did. So showing that that's an area where they're becoming comfortable. But you're right, I wouldn't want to presume anything. But that's, again, sort of this process is the idea to sort of set the options and sort of think about what you want to move forward in that design process.
And in this picture, are those 7-foot parking lanes or 8?
I believe on 14th, I believe those are 7-foot, and those are 6-foot advisory lanes in this section, I want to say. So, and again, they did, because for other parts of the project, they were getting variance for the 7-foot lane, and a few of the places they used the 7-foot parking lane, and then the 5-foot bike lane, and then 10.5-foot lanes. And that was one of the touching that issue of the 10 and 11-foot lane for MnDOT. So they're sort of feeling out a lot of places around the country. They're now sort of no-brainer. The 10-foot lanes becoming their standard. So it is important, though, locally for MnDOT to sort of become a comfort level that this works for us in our environment. And that's the good thing for all these projects is that we'll actually be able to look and demonstrate and evaluate that, okay, this does work, and if something's not working, make the adjustments.
This discussion looks like it's primarily along, it does not include 54th Street. It's primarily Wooddale. 54th is just too narrow to do a similar treatment.
I think what the board showed and what's been talked about in the past are dedicated bike lanes for the length of 54th from France to Wooddale, but a share the road and no particular markings from Zenith to France. Okay. And the gentleman who was here tonight from the church, having the dedicated bike lanes in that section from France to the creek would require the removal of parking on one side. It's my understanding of what I saw. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I think with some of the comments that we've been hearing from the church and some of the other groups along that section, we could look at maybe transitioning the dedicated bike lanes or dropping them or adding them at the bridge, so basically at the creek location. And then as we work our way from the creek to the east, maybe there's a transition zone, or then we immediately flip to more of something as you see here, and then work east of France into just a share the road type facility. So maybe kind of a hierarchy of dedicated bike lanes, advisory lanes once you get east of the bridge, and then a share the road facility as you get east of France. Just as a thought process tonight, that may be a kind of a either step down or step up, depending on which direction you're heading.
I did drive that route tonight on the way here, just simply to see what it was like, and I thought all of a sudden I saw all this parking on both sides of the street, and I thought, well, that was due to maybe the road construction that was happening in that area, and it was still occurring. But as I got closer, I realized that was right where the church is, and both sides of the street were packed, plus the lot was full, and I realized that truly would be a hardship to take probably any of that parking away from that.
Yeah, the church has a rather small lot, and with the watershed and Minnehaha Creek there's a very limited amount of space for expansion, whether building or parking lot expansion. So obviously their main parking source is on-street, or I should say one of the main parking sources is on-street.
I know this kind of detail gets worked out, but it's been mentioned before that the eastbound stop sign could be turned at the creek. You know what I'm talking about? When you're on 54th, you're going eastbound, you hit the creek, there's a stop sign. That could maybe be turned. Would it does it ever happen that a dedicated lane would continue, because there would be width for one lane through the church section. So at least the people going eastbound would have an uninterrupted, completely uninterrupted flow until France. People going westbound are going to have to stop anyway because of Minnehaha Boulevard?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. So they're going to have to stop anyway. And then that would be maybe a transition zone for them. So is that the kind of thing that might be looked at?
Yes, without a doubt. Those are, as you start applying these to the different segments, and then you start looking at the constrictions that you have, the stop signs, the bridge, narrowness of the bridge, the parking needs to the east, the traffic signal at France, and if there's going to be some improvements to that signal once you get past the little business node there, all those things will start to look, and I think we'll start to see some kind of consistency or some kind of ribbon that will develop there as we start to mix and match the pieces.
You know, I think for commuters, they can handle the changes and the unpredictability between, the different treatments better than the Sunday afternoon riders who might be, 5 years old. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but kind of like the idea of making things as consistent and clear as possible. But is there no parking on 54th right now from the creek to Wooddale? Because it kind of looked that way on the boards.
Correct.
But some people were saying they don't want their parking removed, and they seem to be located in that part. So.
Yeah, and that, excuse me, because of the short blocks, staff truly believes that because it's in all the homes actually face the side streets, that it would be much less of a hardship to keep that parking removed along that section of roadway than, say, on Wooddale as you work your way to the south. So there is no parking there today, but obviously continuing that no parking would certainly be, in our opinion, a very acceptable scenario because of the very short distances. All the front streets or houses all front the side streets and through there.
Jack, is it possible that the section of roadway going to the east of the creek over to France could be made just a little bit wider? Because right now, if I've driven it, it seems like the curb line along there on both sides are kind of deteriorated anyway, and there might be enough room to add a couple of feet. And just adding a couple of feet would make a big difference, because if you look at the sheet that we're all looking at now with the 2009 application, it's the one with the heavy red line. Yes, that one. The bottom of that page, you see the 14.5 with through lane existing, and then you look at it 14.5 feet with a bike and a car. That's pretty darn tight. And if you could just add 2 feet to one side even, it could make quite a bit of difference for the bike.
We certainly are looking at long-term revisions to the roadway footprint. However, the grant dollars that we currently have available will not suffice in a reconstruction of 54th Street. However, 54th Street is slated for reconstruction in 2014, so we're a couple years out from a potential reconstruction of that roadway, at which time we would be able to change the footprint, or potentially change the footprint to be more accommodating, to accommodate the narrower bridge and some of these other constraints that we have.
As you said, we're all looking for consistency on our roadways in every way we can, and it's inconsistent for us to have a different roadway width on one side of the creek versus the other. Just as it is on Wooddale, I think that you mentioned a couple of meetings ago that Wooddale south of 56th, I think it was, gets 2 feet narrower or something like that. And so that becomes a little bit inconsistent as well.
Correct. Wooddale was reconstructed relatively recently in 2005 or 6, 2005. So there wouldn't be any desire potentially to go in there and do a reconstruction or addition of the curb on that location. However, I think we're finding a number of scenarios here that can fit within the TLC's requirements and fit within the state's requirements and fit within the comfort zone of the Transportation Commission and City Council that will allow us to
to, albeit maybe have a little bit of different application throughout this boulevard, still convey the bicycles to the best ability and the safest ability that we can. So like I said, I think 54th has a long-term solution, a next 3 to 4 year solution, but also has a short-term solution as well, which is a much more cost-effective solution, and see how this works, see what lessons are learned from this operation, and maybe those lessons can be incorporated into the larger reconstruction project in the future.
Yeah, I have a question about the Sharrows. The other idea for Wooddale is remove the center line and put shared lane markings. And do we have a picture of what that might look like so people can see it? I think in Steve's presentation from...
Yeah, and I apologize, I don't have that presentation. I don't have a photo of what the Sharrow looks like. And it was obviously not this bike lane.
It's like that, but with even more paint.
Correct, and it's more of a chevron approach to it.
And I know that in this, aesthetics are hugely important in Edina overall, and so certainly on Wooddale. And advisory lanes seem to have less paint, compared to at least the pictures we saw of Sharrows in the past. And then also signs, which would require, less signage, because signs would be a very big deal for people. Is there, I'm just assuming that Sharrows might require more bikes may use full lane type signs or something.
Yeah, I think essentially in terms of objectives for providing to the cyclists on the street, the Sharrows can be used in a lot of interim situations, and they're really providing a cue that one is giving you a bicyclist a cue of about where they should be positioned in the street so they don't get into door zones or conflicts, and also to convey to the motorist that when the bicyclist's out there, that's the appropriate space. There's sometimes not always clarity with that. I think there's still some confusion. But in terms of really giving a cyclist a sense, it doesn't really provide very much definition. They're intermittent, just 2 chevrons and a bicycle symbol. So, in terms of really wanting to create the comfort levels, it's my thought probably the advisory bike lanes are sort of setting a clearer definition that's along the street and saying, this is the place where I'm allowed and supposed to be, and able to sort of communicate a consistent message between the motorist and the cyclist. But, that said, there's really not a hard rule of thumb of how to use it. It's really about the appropriate context and then careful and appropriate placement. I certainly do agree that the use of signage, I've sort of come from a different school of thought that we use signs for what we failed on. So wherever possible, if we don't need a sign, it's much better to have the lack of it, particularly when you're in a residential or a neighborhood context.
Well, Jack, what's needed from us tonight? Should we work on formulating a recommendation beyond what we've already sent to the council? Maybe just something specifically in Wooddale, because that's the one part that we didn't weigh in on specifically, or?
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate this evening. Obviously, when we bring to the public hearing in December with the council, you've had initial support, obviously, already given from the Transportation Commission, but any additional, I guess the hope was this evening that we'd have a lot of correspondence from additional residents. And we had a lot of that at the meeting. We haven't had a lot of that since then. So I think taking that information that that you made your original recommendation on, supplementing that with the information you've heard from the residents and some of the TLC representatives at the last meeting, then again tonight, is there anything that you want to reinforce or to change or to modify, I guess would be what I'm opening up to this group to forward on to council.
Okay. I'll put that out there for thoughts. Anybody want to jump in? Oh, Jack Rose, do you have a comment? Yeah, of course.
Hopefully pulling the first two presentations together. I would just say, safety. Remember, I left you with the word safety. Are there bikes on this corridor? No. And what is the safer thing to do? To put down some paint or just leave them as is? So that's the fundamental question as engineers that we try to look at it to do the right thing. So when you say a complete street puts a higher precedence on that we should do something for those other modes, it's not okay to dismiss that. And then the tool I would tell you that's promoted in the training and in the implementation of this, especially as you get to these low volume roads, is risk management. So now we're going to get into probability. So if you could take a quick look at this photo, and then let's go back to the boards there. Maybe go to another board where there are bikes and everybody's on there. So I would just have you look at those sections. What is the probability there will be cars in both directions, bikes in both directions on the road as you make a decision? So I find this graphic to be very misleading in probability that at these volumes, if I'm hearing correctly, that would not occur. The chances of that are, if it comes close to occurring, what do you think the drivers would do? They would slow down. And so in a design decision, that you put the driver in a situation where their human behavior is going to slow down because of the design. Are we on track yet? That's where these designs come from. The concept that we can go through a more thorough evaluation and not just say, because this is different, like the interstate, we didn't know what to do. But probability, would you say it's better to do nothing and let the bikers fend for themselves? Or take the probable risk that that's not the situation that occurs? Look in the upper part of the picture. How many cars are traveling? How many bikes are there? What's the probability that that would all occur? And let that guide your decision making. So that's how I would just say it connects to the previous presentation.
Jack, what if the city leaves four cars in a row parked end to end almost, and the bikes are not going to swerve in and out of each one to avoid cars coming up from behind, so the bike is going to be out in the driver's lane, even though it might be considered advisory and shared and all that sort of thing, for a longer period than drivers might want to tolerate, and they might come too close.
Well, that's a great point, but that also brings up in bicycle practice.
Yeah.
When the bicyclist feels like they should be over on the curb like that, that's actually the wrong place to be. That's
Right.
bad, and because when they get to those cars and they weave out, that's when crashes happen for bicyclists a lot. So
in those cases, maybe they can go down the sidewalk because there's not going to be too many pedestrians on sidewalks, or almost hardly any ever.
well, certainly, again, it's about facilitating the way you want a street to work, and we respect that the bicyclists are vehicles that use the street. And so when we think about designing the street, it's accommodating in a way that both creates a safe presence for the motorist and the cyclist, but also does provide better visual cues. And so, when you see experienced bicyclists go down the street right now, he's already going to be positioned without any markings out where that lane would be, because he knows or she knows that I need to stay in a very straight, predictable movement, because that's the only way to really make sure that the vehicles coming by can anticipate if I'm staying in a straight line. Whereas a lot of folks who feel that they're a little bit worried about traffic will hug close to the curb, and actually it will sometimes have a really bad result when they do come up to somewhere and unexpectedly make that veer. And I think it is about making sure that the street provides that type of accommodation, and for cycling, it's not one size fits all. So around the community, you want to have facilities that are going to work for all these different experience levels to make sure that people have safe, comfortable opportunities for the cycling that they choose.
And when we talk about safety on Wooddale, there's a kind of unique situation that this parking lane, there are I have too many papers still, let's say 170 parking spaces, something like that. And a member of the bike task force and I, over the summer at different times, mostly for me day, for him early morning, late at night, we surveyed how many vehicles were parked. And, the most we ever found was 19. So something like less than 10% of the parking, because most of the time it was 9 to 12 cars, is used along this stretch. And what happens? People are using it as a wrong way. People are going southbound in what is a north-facing parking lane. They're going on bikes. I've seen them jogging, and there's a sidewalk right next to it. And so when we look at safety, one of the things that is kind of the issue that really needs to be dealt with is how do we deal with this problem that's existing right now? And I'm not sure that any of the things being proposed other than removing the parking lane are going to fix that problem. But it is on people's radar screens to need to be fixed. Any other comments? Helen?
I just had one thought. Are motorized wheelchairs or scooters ever considered in these lanes? I believe they're supposed to go on the sidewalk.
No, by definition, those are assistive devices, and they are considered pedestrians. So they are to have accommodations, and of course the sidewalks have to be accessible because we do know sometimes people in wheelchairs and assistive devices will be in the street, whether it's a bike lane or not, because we don't have the accommodation. But yeah, essentially the bicycle is basically the pedal-driven vehicles. It's very much classed other things, and then you get to your real gray areas with people who would be on rollerblades or other, and essentially they're in the realm with the pedestrian. And so, but of course they have to respectfully use the pedestrian facilities and behave in a prudent manner when they're using the facility. But that's certainly something to make sure that you are communicating to people. It's not the bike facilities are about bikes, and when you put them on the street, that's part of the street. And that's to use vehicular bicycling, but certainly it's not a substitute for accommodations for people who might be in wheelchairs or other devices.
Parts of this also that there were a couple of comments, and this might be for Jack, which I can't see you. So there were a couple of comments from residents concerned about removing the turn lane on Valley View, and my understanding is that in the process of looking at this more closely, it's already anticipated that there will be a couple of places where the left turn lane will be retained. Is that correct?
Correct. As part of the analysis or part of the TLC recommendation to the city was lane conversion from 3-lane with a continuous left turn lane down to 2 lanes on the section of Valley View from Wooddale down to Crosstown. Staff here again, this road was reconstructed about the same with the Wooddale project in 2005. There was rationale for why it was set to 3-lane at the time, based on turn volumes, the higher densities of the residencies along that section of roadway. So staff has asked that we've been in communication with WSB Consulting to look at what that lane reduction would look like, and from a safety perspective, what that would, how that would operate. And the initial, I guess, results at this point are that there needs to probably still be these left turn lanes at certain locations, one being Wooddale, a second one probably being at 62nd Street. However, through the remainder of the corridor, they probably could be removed. And so that's the logic we're moving forward with at this point. What that'll be redefined, refined as we move forward as well. There's probably a few other locations where they may be acceptable or would be desired by residents, businesses, but I don't know that they're necessary. So we're going to be, that analysis is ongoing and should be finalized here in the coming weeks.
One of the intersections mentioned specifically was Oak Lawn. Is that 62nd? Where is that?
Yes. There's an interesting intersection configuration of Oak Lawn, 62nd, and Valley View. That would be the one that they're considering.
Is that Burley's Hair Salon at that intersection?
Correct.
Okay.
That's a better landmark. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going there tomorrow. So if you do remove the left turn lanes, you're still going to have, 19 and a half feet on each side of the center stripe. And if there's somebody who wants to turn left, and there's not a bicycle in the bike lane, the cars stacked up behind them are going to go around.
And that was the concern that we had when the recommendation was to remove the center continuous left turn lane. Mm-hmm. The bike lane has the possibility of becoming a bypass lane, which I think TLC would say it happens today. It's going to happen on any road that you have in town with the right fog line. Happens on France Avenue if you drive France in that same section.
in theory, you're not supposed to be passing on the right. You see a lot of cars that do that.
Happens on Vernon.
Happens on all the streets. The concern we have is just balancing that safety of that bicyclist with the motor vehicle. And so that's why we want to have a little more discussion on it before it was decided upon. We wanted to look at that in a little more detail and see if there's ways to mitigate that concern.
Okay, thanks.
My mic's not on. Okay. Going further south, the segment Valley View Road 66 to 69th, there are no bike lanes shown. I remember this group strongly supported bike lanes through that section all the way down to 70th. Has there been, and I know it's the project memorandum, which hasn't been widely distributed, but the one from this month to MnDOT also just doesn't mention that part of the route. So has there been a deliberate move away from bike lanes on this section?
At this stage, I don't think anything's been deliberately removed anywhere. We're weighing the options, and the initial engineer and all of us would say, capacities. What do you do when you take 4 lanes down to 2? And there again, that is something that there's probably a great solution to it, and there's probably rationale and balances that can be had here. But we need to drive to that answer, and we're not there yet. This is a larger section of roadway that, obviously you can see the large complexes here that businesses that are using this corridor want to be obviously aware of the speed limit, aware of the volumes that we have out there, and make the right judgment. At this point, we haven't determined what that judgment is. We're coming forward with just a schematics. These were just all these drawings that we were presented on the October 6th and here again this evening are just the schematics of kind of the thought process that the groups have gone through. And within that, though, there is some definition by the TLC on where certain aspects need to occur. Other areas they've given the latitude for us to look at some kind of blend of these items, or maybe making a more distinct stance on some of these items as well. So here again, this isn't a final product. We're driving to a solution for the whole bike boulevard, which at this point, there's only segments that I think are actually been defined as to what needs to happen on them. These other segments, there's more discussion to come. So I guess if you have a recommendation or a restating of the strong support, I think that would be appropriate component of your recommendation this evening.
Well, 54 feet, again, I had a calculator, and 4 11-foot travel lanes gives 2 5-foot bike lanes. I know it's not that simple, but, I know speeds here seem kind of fast. And when you've got these giant lanes, it seems to contribute to that, I think.
Well, we'll start here again with saying these are the state aid minimums as they stand today. To vary from this, you would have to do a state aid variance at this time.
The standard's 13 feet?
You need 11-foot travel lane with a 2-foot reaction.
Oh.
So it is 13 feet. And so with that being stated, here again, this is where we are today. Where do we want to go after variance? Where do we think we can find some other solution that may fit into these advisory lanes or share the road facilities or something like that that may prevent us from having to go to a variance process, or may be a better solution than going to the variance process.
Yep, just a quick comment. I think to keep consistency through the corridor, especially with this being higher volume, really looking at dedicating a bike lane here. The presentation earlier talking about maybe a 10-foot lane for those 2, then you'd have a 2-foot reaction and a 5-foot bike lane. So really, pushing it on this if we're going to maintain consistency with this grant and really have a good chance at, pushing this whole effort off on the right foot, especially if we're going to move this forward.
I agree with Commissioner Thompson, and just wanted to note that the Aquatic Center is quite close to this area and used by lots of families, lots of kids, and I think the dedicated bike lane would support their use of other modes to get to the Aquatic Center, particularly in those busy summer months. And really just want to stress again that the in-road cyclists will bike no matter what. It is these sorts of treatments that really support the use of bicycles for transportation by folks that don't feel comfortable without facilities, women, kids. So I would strongly support a dedicated lane in this stretch.
I'm probably an old-fashioned person about this and a lot of other things as well because I'm old. But I would feel very uncomfortable riding a bike underneath the underpass in a dedicated lane and having to cross a place where there's a off-ramp coming off crosstown, continuing in that where cars are coming off at 55 miles an hour, and in the process of slowing down, they don't get down to 30, 35 miles an hour until they get to about 66th Street. Even some of those don't. And that's why the police department has a speed trap along those side streets about every week. And people get a lot of tickets along there. Fortunately, I'm a little slower driver, so I observe all this, and I've never gotten a ticket in there, but I would tend to want to stay on sidewalks with my bike. And I guess that's inconsistent with what the bike people want, but can a sidewalk be widened in order to, if the roadways can accommodate, share the road, can a sidewalk be wide enough to share the sidewalk, for example?
Yeah, I mean, and actually there are standards for shared use paths to be accommodated. One of the issues is that, generally when you're alongside a roadway, it's actually better from a cyclist standpoint to try and accommodate in the street. When you use the side path, you increase your likelihood of crashes at intersections by 5 times. It puts you in an unexpected position in terms of approaching intersections and driveways, given that you're at a speed that's not going to be expected. So it's really, from the sort of League of American Bicyclists and the LCI perspective, discouraged as practice. Side paths are used as sort of an interim treatment in locations where they can't retrofit streets. But again, it's sort of when you get to really trying to achieve the complete streets goal that you want for a project, there's the trade-offs, and that one can certainly be a negative one in terms of giving the cyclists a sense of false security using the side path, and then at the same time sort of maybe encouraging people to think, well, whenever there's sidewalks, I should ride. And then when you do get on the other busier sidewalks with pedestrians, that creates a big threat to them.
I'm not advocating all sidewalks in the city be bike paths. I'm advocating this one. And I just feel very uncomfortable about, I'm sorry, I'll shut that off. I feel very uncomfortable about this particular situation because it's a difficult situation.
No, and I can agree with the sense of
and you do have a half a mile in there where you would be safe.
Yeah, but that does get back to that consistency when you're having a connected facility. And I will say, where you have interchanges and when freeways interface with local roads and that's still very interchange, that creates a lot of challenges for any kind of design. And there are a lot of different guidance to sort of work on better treatments when you're carrying bike lanes through there. But that's where actually real attention to detail and getting the right treatment and really working with the input of stakeholders and making sure that we can get something that the design engineer is really comfortable with, and that also then MnDOT will say, yes, we can sign off on this even if we're using it more from a design exception and we're looking at seeing how this performs here in Minnesota.
On the previous image where you had the alongside those 6,600 France buildings, I just noted when that was up there, those are 2 lanes in each direction. There are no points along there where there currently are 2 cars side by side, and it's obviously a midday because the parking lots are fairly full. So having one of those, having the similar advisory lane or something along there, seems to be an appropriate use of that space, I guess. I don't know about bike lanes dedicated and then narrowing the lanes, but maybe more the advisory lanes. And then I guess I'd just like to continue on and move this forward to the city council with our previous recommendations, but then also adding the advisory lane concept that's come up since our last meeting.
I'm just going to support that, Sam. I think the advisory lane along Wooddale is a good option and a good test to see if we can accommodate something with less resources on those lower volume streets. I think I did hear from residents on there directly about the parking issue. And I do believe that is a valid concern. So I think this is a good win-win on the advisory lane option. On the southern section, I do think this is an area where bike lanes dedicated would be justified just due to the speed of that road. People don't, in my opinion, need to be driving that fast on that section of the road, and we would all benefit from a reduction in traffic speed and from a dedicated lane.
More thoughts, or are we ready to go forward with a motion of something along restating our support that is in this August 21st letter that was in your packet, with the addition of support for advisory bike lanes on Wooddale? Is that what people are leaning toward? Yeah? All right. Does anybody want to move that?
I so move.
Okay. It's been moved. Seconded?
Second.
Okay. Second. Discussion on that motion. Further thoughts? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that carries. So, thank you, Tony. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We have this format for communicating our advice. Would this be something that would utilize that format? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I would say yes, we would utilize that format and forward on just a revised recommendation to kind of update where we're at, and I'd be happy to volunteer to do that this time.
Yay. Okay. So I do not have our procedure that we adopted in front of me, so somebody please remind me. Do we need to vote on using the format, or is it enough that we have consensus? Catherine?
I think we decided that we had already voted on the recommendation so that we didn't need to vote again.
Okay, on using the format. But we have our volunteer, and we will we'll touch base about getting it to the council for when are they meeting on this one?
They'll be seeing it in December, but we can get it to them ahead of time, so they have plenty of time. So it could be on the November 2nd.
Okay.
Yes, November 2nd.
All right. Wonderful. Everybody. Our next item. Oh, this one. Okay. Park Lawn Road, Londonderry. Show of hands. Who has driven this? So. No pause, because we've talked about. Okay. So, Jack, go ahead. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll try to give a little bit of background on this project, or excuse me, in this intersection. Also in your packet, I have almost identical presentation in there. This was something that first came into the Traffic Safety Committee early on. Actually came in last, it was a year ago now. It was late in the year, and we started out this spring with traffic counts, about the April timeframe. The request came in to our Traffic Safety Committee individual for an all-way stop sign or additional stop signs at the intersection of Parkwood and Londonderry Road. And this is up in the northwest part of Edina, the Parkwood Knolls neighborhood. This is, I don't know if this is which edition this is, but it's one of the earlier editions. And currently there's a southbound stop sign as you're coming down south on Londonderry for vehicles traveling on Parkwood, kind of Parkwood east and west, and Londonderry kind of north. Data was collected. You can see there's a number of traffic counts there. Traffic volumes were low, 200-300 cars on most of the legs, 400 or 600 on Parkwood, kind of going. So that the main
travel direction is Parkwood, either down Londonderry or west on Parkwood seems to be the main direction of traffic. And the speeds are within reason. They're 29, 31 miles an hour, so they're right around what we'd expect for a posted 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. This is kind of a view of that intersection looking north. The stop sign is just hidden in the next sign. You can see it. That's the current stop sign that's showing here. And the concern of the requester was that this area just, because of the kind of the sweeping nature and the wide area, needed some additional traffic control and right-of-way definition. And the request was for an all-way stop sign. After going through, excuse me, all the traffic counts, all the data collection early in the year, staff recommended denial of a multi-way stop sign there. That was the Traffic Safety Committee's denial. That went forward to the City of Edina council meeting in early in the year, and at that time the requester actually presented some additional information, and the council asked staff to take another look at this location. And so we've gone through, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of what we additionally looked at, and have a new recommendation that we want to present to you this evening. That recommendation would then be forwarded to council for the November meeting, and potentially revisions could be made to that intersection yet this fall. So based on the knowledge that it does not meet our current city policy for all-way stop sign, we took another look at it based on some of the other concerns that they had. And 30-mile-an-hour roadways, 30 feet wide, really parking allowed on all these streets, no sidewalks, more of a rural section up there, no curb and gutter. Traffic counts were taken over 6 days, 8 days, 6 different locations. We already talked a little bit about the data. Accident history, one accident between 2001 and 2008, which happened to be between a vehicle and a school bus, and the cause of accident was kind of lack of right-of-way, so to speak, lack of known right-of-way. But no additional accidents since 2009. This is kind of not a traditional 90-degree intersection, but these Y intersections, we have a lot of them in the Parkwood Knolls and Indian Hills neighborhood. And so it was something that, as we looked at this one, we probably should look at other locations within the community. This just goes through all the rationale on why a multi-way stop sign was not installed here, how it met all, or how it did not meet any of our warrants, didn't meet our warrants for a signal, a crash problem, traffic volumes were too low, vehicle pedestrian movements were too low, 85th percentile speeds were too low, and the 80% of minimum values of the 4B, C, and D were all too low. So here again, just reiterating that an all-way stop sign was not the solution. And at that time, when we went through all of this data with the requesters and mentioned that it was not going to meet our all-way stop sign criteria, we gave that individual the opportunity to do our neighbor traffic management plan, which the individual chose not to do. But yet, when they spoke at the council, that's when council had asked us to make some additional decisions, or I guess have some additional discussion on what could be done out there. So we're actually suggesting that we do a realignment of the intersection, and what that would look like is with this graphic here. We'd actually move the stop sign. It'd still be a stop sign for southbound Londonderry. We'd move the stop sign from, which is kind of back here at this location now, out, and you would actually tee this intersection in. So Londonderry would still have the main, Londonderry to Parkwood would still be the main travel way, and vehicles traveling southbound on Londonderry would still have to stop. By kind of squaring up this intersection, it's going to make more dedicated traffic movements, better defining the right-of-way, who has the right-of-way through this intersection. And our city Public Works Department is proposing to do this work yet this fall, that we would actually just come in, since this is all currently pavement today, under this green area is all currently asphalt. We just remove this pavement that's under there, put some bituminous curb lines in to help better constrict the traffic flow, and then plant this area in some seed, hydro seed type of mix this fall for the springtime when the temperatures warm up and we could get some grass growing. So this is kind of an interesting project where, like I said, it hasn't followed the traditional method. It hasn't followed what we would have typically done from a resident perspective when it comes to the neighbor traffic management plan. But with the council interjection, staff, like I said, came back with this option as the low-cost, high reward kind of improvement that would be something that would be very easily obtained yet this fall. So I guess with that, I'm asking for this commission to see if this is an appropriate improvement to the operations of the local traffic transportation system within Edina. Any questions?
Mr. Sullivan, can you define low cost?
Yes, relatively low cost. With the mostly pavement removal and some bituminous curb and city employees doing the work in city equipment, it's about a $1,500 to $2,000 revision at this location. To do more aggressive type measures, concrete curb and gutter, or neighborhood street realignments on a grander scale would obviously go much greater in cost.
Looking at one of the slides, the Londonderry road volume ranges from 216 to 413. And is the 216 the southbound on Londonderry, or where were?
216 is up here on the north of the intersection.
So going southbound, or is that both?
That's combined direction.
Okay.
So 100 cars each direction, roughly each direction. You have about 400 cars traveling through Parkwood. Over here, 600 on Parkwood east of the intersection, and 400 or so on Londonderry south of Stoddard Circle.
The resident who brought this forward was also very concerned about pedestrians and bicyclists. And will this change? Do you think, will this improve things for pedestrians and bicyclists?
I believe there will be improvement with the narrowing of this intersection. That you can see right here, it's relatively wide. By narrowing this up, as we've talked about previously tonight, narrower lane, narrower roadway will produce some slower speeds through here. Beyond that, I think the slower speeds will be what will be the change for pedestrians and bicyclists. I don't think there's any other measures involved with this that would greatly improve that pedestrian safety or vehicle safety. It's truly based on speed and better defining of the right-of-way.
Is there any reason to think that the speeds on Londonderry going north and continuing on to Parkwood will drop at all with this?
Londonderry north.
If you're going north on Londonderry and you're going to curve to Parkwood, no.
To the east?
Yeah.
Quite honestly, I would expect no drop. Yeah. And quite honestly, it would probably stay, I think you could count this thing 6 or 7 times over the next year with these changes, and they would fluctuate within the standard deviation. I would expect very little change. And maybe even there's a potential of a slight increase, knowing that it's a better defined intersection, that those individuals that go there today cautiously, knowing that they don't feel comfortable knowing what everyone's doing, they may feel more comfortable knowing that it's a better defined and better channelized intersection. Potentially, yeah.
Just to comment that currently there is no curb and gutter in any part of this immediate area. Is that, I guess, is that a concern, or is that how do you just kind of bump up a bituminous curb there and to help define that area, try to narrow it a little bit?
Yeah, first thing we'll do is by cutting most of the pavement back. That'll be the biggest definers that will really minimize that. The bituminous curb is just going to be in there to help there again add another level of constriction to the residents that are traveling that corridor. You're correct. There's very little curb and gutter in this part of the community. When and if a street reconstruction project comes through here, curb and gutter will be recommended.
And that east of, where they did the reconstruction a couple of years ago, that curb and gutter did go in there. And then further, west of Blake, now for a block over to Schaefer, is all curb and gutter. So you'd probably look at that as you go forward.
Very similar. And additionally, probably at a more global scale, we'll be bringing to you the 2012 reconstruction projects next month, and kind of showing that there's a number of intersections on our projects next year that are very, very wide, huge amounts of pavement for an intersection, and they'll be ways that we'll be looking to do something very similar to these T-type intersections, somehow restricting down the impervious surface to minimize just how much impervious surface we have, how much maintenance we have to do, how much snow plowing we have to do, and increasing the driver behavior to some degree, getting some more restriction on these. So this will be very similar to what you'll see in a lot of neighborhoods coming forward in the next month. Here's also another graphic that we showed of how you might, on a more holistic scale, look at the entire intersection or entire area. There was even discussion that this was a great spot for a residential roundabout where this tree is, a little smaller scale roundabout, but obviously that's on a grander scope than this small intersection improvement.
And I was just going to bring that up on that graphic. That area, there's certain areas right now that, I mean, you could just do away with the road. That central area, we used to get together for during the holidays and have bonfires and have the Salvation Army out and sing carols and whatnot. So I don't know if they still do that. I think there's a tree there now, isn't there?
There is, yep.
Yeah, because without that tree, you would often get tire tracks going straight across that island as well. So
yeah, quite honestly, this little north lobe of the road probably doesn't serve a lot of purpose. It probably doesn't need to be there. But there again, on a more holistic approach to the neighborhood, what we would do is we would evaluate that at the time. So that's why we're just kind of going and looking at just this intersection up here at Londonderry and Parkwood today.
Jack mentioned it. I just wanted to comment that this design, I mean, even without the stop sign, obviously it would slow speeds, but there's going to be the stop sign there anyway. But this design has the advantage of reducing the impervious surface and better filtration and drainage near such a waterway, I think, or, a body of water is aligned with our desire to get towards, more living streets practices. So I think I commend staff for coming up with this design and look forward to seeing more of this.
Just a very quick question about signage. If you're trying to continue on Londonderry, you're going to need a sign that says Londonderry turn left or something. Because currently you can kind of go straight and stay on Londonderry.
Well, I think each resident that we talked to had a different opinion on what was the main roadway through there. What we're certainly using is the traffic volumes that we have presented. What we will, on that stop sign, will be the street sign for Londonderry North, Londonderry Southwest, and Parkwood Northeast. They'll be on there.
When is this neighborhood slated for reconstruction?
It is not within the next 10-year plan that we currently have. Like I said, within a couple of years
that may. Of the intersection from May.
Yes.
Says maybe it should be.
Well, our needs outpace our
falling
financing.
apart.
One last question. I emailed you about this, and you said you've heard from a few residents, and help me remember, most in favor. Is that correct?
Well, of the 106 or 7 residents that received, that live in this area that received the letter that was in here that's kind of stated what we're planning to do and that we would do it yet this year, and asked for responses, I received 5 responses. 4 were in favor of the revision, and 1 was opposed to the revision. So 5 individuals out of 100 isn't very good response rate, which partially, in my opinion, states maybe this isn't an area that needs revision to it. That's, it doesn't need an always stop sign. It's kind of shown by there's not enough people that were passionate about this to make revisions. However, through this process, this is the outcome that we've chosen.
And the requester, is he happy with it, or was he? I hope he's not the one person who didn't like it. Gotta ask.
Talking with the requester, I think there's still the concern of the pedestrian movements here. But like I said, in this neighborhood, I don't know where you're going to, how you're going to change that at this stage, and nor would it fall into our typical sidewalk type of plan for such low volumes and relatively appropriate speeds. So I guess with that being said, that I think any improvements positive from this from the homeowner's perspective, but certainly still probably has his concerns with with any design that we do out there.
And he was not the one person?
Correct.
Okay.
He was not.
Michael? Yep, go ahead.
I would move the proposed design to address the three-way intersection.
Second, anybody?
Second.
It's been seconded. Further discussion?
Yes.
Go ahead, Tom.
I just had one point, and that is that I don't like to see curb and gutter made out of asphalt because the snowplows tend to take it out so quickly, usually in the first year. So while I'm in favor of this as a design, and I like it, and I think it's proper, especially since it's causing a right angle connection to the road, the main crossing east-west road. The part I don't like is the asphalt, and I think it's just an extra expense for the city. And I think it would be better if some kind of perhaps a slightly mountable style of curb that you and your staff would pick that would be easily handled by snowplows.
I appreciate that comment. We looked at using concrete curb and gutter, and it raised the cost from a reasonable $2,000 to what we felt a little more unreasonable, closer to $7,000 to $8,000 for that same work.
Okay. I was using $10 a
Sure.
foot.
And so that was one of our deciding factors. We agreed that bituminous curb and gutter is not a long-term solution. We wouldn't recommend that on like the Parkwood Knolls neighborhood. It was done at west of Blake last year, or the neighborhood that's happening to the east of Blake this year. We always recommend concrete curb and gutter for a long-term solution, but knowing that we're trying to find a solution here that was both relatively quick and inexpensive, this drove us to this conclusion.
Okay.
One more comment, and it's kind of based off of what Catherine said. With having that curb there, you're going to be directing a lot more water down. There's a hill coming down Parkwood that it's not really visible, but it's downhill toward that pond, obviously. There's going to be a lot of water entering at the south end of that. Is there any additional treatment of that water, or any rain gardens proposed or anything at that south end, perhaps, where there's going to be more water?
We actually believe there'll be that water that goes there today. With the grades that were shot, there's a very good grade on the road. Actually, most of the water actually comes down the road instead of actually going in through this wooded buckthorned area here. And so quite honestly, we'll actually have a reduction by that little bit of green space, and that water, like I said, was going there today. Now there'll actually be less water actually getting to that same location. So there was no planned rain garden or any other type of water treatment facilities.
Perhaps a slotted curb. That way the water would get to each of the slots and start running through it and into the green area.
I think we're trying to over-design, and we're spending a lot of time on something that's pretty common sense here. So again, I would just reiterate my motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passes. Thank you. And, this is a good transition to the traffic safety report. When this came forward, we were not yet receiving the traffic safety reports before they go to the city council. And who knows if, how this might have been approached if we had a current process in place at that time. The traffic safety report of October 20th, I had some questions. Did anybody else?
Just a brief one. The one that was denied at Glengarry and Northwood, it's not an intersection, it's a corner. There's no cross traffic. Do you ever put a stop sign where there's no cross traffic?
So section B1
Yeah.
on page 3.
Yeah, this area is located just west of Highland Park, and you're correct. It's two intersecting roads that form a 90, but not a true full intersection. And correct, we would typically not do a stop sign at that location. Here again, the requester was looking more for defining of the right-of-way, who has the right-of-way at that intersection. And after looking at a stop sign, it wasn't appropriate, and neither was a yield sign. The volume of traffic on this roadway, and just it gives the fact that it is a unique 90-degree corner, basically, didn't really.
It's a very appropriate answer. I thought it was a really strange request.
Yeah.
Well, that's why on my copy I wrote other issues, question mark. I mean, were there other issues, or was it purely wanting to define the right of way for motor vehicles?
It is my opinion that this is truly was just a request driven from the use of the park.
So for pedestrians, so the concern is?
No, of individuals who arrive at the park for soccer games via vehicle and who leave via vehicle.
Okay.
That are probably not as familiar with the neighborhood as those who actually, because 186 cars that drive that road have something to do with the operations of the park, something to do with the fact that it is somewhat of a cut through between Vernon and Interlaken. Find your way through there, so to speak.
Okay. Oh, okay. It's getting late, so I hesitate to take up much time on this one. But in the section D, so traffic counts, like tubes are being put down now more routinely. Can we start seeing that data just in a spreadsheet or something simple?
Yes, without a doubt. We are continuing with very nice fall. We've had to continue to count streets, and we can start to produce some more consistent reports on what we've been able to count this late summer, early fall, without a doubt.
The number one under section C for Benton Avenue, requesting a bike lane and sidewalk, and I'll actually do my BETF update right now. The BETF is prioritizing routes that they would like to see striped and signed, and Benton is one of them. So, yeah, that is worthy of more study, I think. But I guess there's nothing in here that.
Yep, and we're actually out there right now counting that street to get some more current traffic data. And when we had talked with the requester here, that was also brought up that we have a bicycle primary and secondary route map within the community. We also have a sidewalk plan, and these are some of the things that we should be looking at as we evaluate this road in a little more detail.
Yeah. Yes.
On number 3 in this group C, I think eastbound, you mean 54th, not Sherwood. Is that correct? Because Sherwood, I believe, goes north-south.
This is regarding that bus turnoff that you see there.
Right.
And we guess we can call it, I'm not sure what it's actually called. We defined it as Sherwood here, but it's coming out of that neighborhood, that's that landlocked neighborhood. And a number of vehicles are using that bus pull-off area just west of the BP gas station as a quick way to get out and out of Vernon. And there was a sign there in the past. The sign has since been removed, and so our recommendation was just have the Public Works sign shop replace that sign, making sure that that is for buses only and no other vehicles are allowed to use that bus pull-off as a quick way to get onto Vernon.
Just a quick question about the traffic counts, and going back to our France Avenue presentation, is there any technology for figuring out where people are going rather than just counting the cars to define that issue of are people going through on France, or are they driving on France for a couple of blocks and turning off? Are they on their errands, or are they using that as a travel route?
I'm not familiar with the technology that's available, like the WSB, that's our traffic consultant, would be better able to define that. But I do know that we have a Southeast Edina transportation model, and it takes into account some of that through volume versus some of that trip volume that's generated by people going and coming. And that's about as much as I can give you tonight, but I can get some answers back on that for sure.
It's my impression the through lanes are often sparsely used. Everybody's turning. So a lot of traffic is local.
Any more? Paul?
Just going to move approval of the report.
Yep. Okay. A second? Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, great, thanks. Initial feedback on the LA County Living Streets policy. Did you all get that link? You didn't? Oh. Well, here it is. Thank you to Aylin for sending this link. LA County has put together a Living Streets design manual. They will freely allow people to borrow from this with credit. And let's just pass it one way and the other. What? I want it back, yeah. So just very briefly, some initial feedback for people who have had a chance to at least browse it. You know, I have not read it cover to cover. It's how many pages? It's quite long, but 381, spoken like somebody who photocopied it. And so, but what I saw looked a lot like what we have been talking about. So one thought I wanted to put out there for people is a way to maybe move forward our process would be to create a review working group of up to 4 members to meet and review this, probably review North St. Paul again, review Maplewood, which is almost done, right?
We're getting close.
Okay. And see how we can take what is out there and adapt it for Edina, and then put that out there for public engagement and feedback and workshops. What do people think about that? Do we have people who would be interested in being on that? I imagine it'd be a relatively short-term commitment. You know, read it, meet, discuss, define.
I'll be the first volunteer on that.
Well, I think we want to start moving forward, so it would really be, I see this as a way to jumpstart a process. A couple of months, keep you in mind the holidays. Does that sound realistic?
Yeah, getting the group together and meeting a few times over the next few months, just to kind of steer where we're going with everything, kind of while we get the RFP out and a consultant on board. We can kind of have our own ideas on what we want something to look like, just so we're not using the consultant's time maybe on something that we can do up front.
Sure. I'd be happy to volunteer. I'm tied up pretty much through mid-November, but after that, can participate.
I will as well.
We can have one more with a quorum. And I'd like to be an alternate for when people can't make it.
I just wonder if we should, can we open this up to other commissions, our group that gets together? Because there are elements of this that seem to touch on the work of other commissions, including the Planning Commission and the Environmental Commission.
Yes, they would be part of the longer process, but this is really to identify what in these existing documents do we think we want to carry forward to those groups, for example.
Okay.
Okay, I will volunteer to be the 4th for now. If somebody wants to replace me, let me know. And how this needs to work is we can vote to form the committee, and actually we need to have a chair. I think the first person who volunteers gets to be the chair. Okay? And so we have our purpose for it. We have proposed membership. We have a chair. And then because our bylaws are not enacted yet, it needs to go to the City Council for their approval. And they'll hopefully like the idea and let us form this working group, and then we can start meeting after. Sound like a plan? Does somebody want to move forming the working group as stated? It's been moved, seconded?
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. I think that would be a great way to start moving forward. And Alan, thank you for sending that out so promptly as soon as it hit your desk.
Thanks for taking it up.
It's quite heavy. Questions and updates from student members. We added this to the agenda to make sure that you had a time that you could bring forward a question about something that that happened tonight, or that you've been working on, something that you might want us to focus on. So it's just your opportunity to share any question or thought. And if not, if you don't feel comfortable or have nothing on your mind, you'll get another chance at the end of the meeting. So nothing like putting people on the spot. Steven, I'll put you on the spot.
At the end of September, I received an email forwarded from the city of Edina from a concerned parent who goes at Concord Elementary School. And she was requesting to have the sidewalks or the crosswalks better marked in that area. And she said that they aren't kind of in the best shape now. They're kind of older, she said. And then she requested having, you know how they have signs that mark where the crosswalk is? They like the little people, the pentagon-shaped signs. She requested some of those signs be put in. And then she requests, there's 2 parking lots at Concord Elementary School, I think. And at their upper parking lot, there's no crosswalk that connects from the parking lot to the other side of the street. And a lot of kids just have to kind of run across the street, and there's a lot of buses. That's where the buses are parked, and the parents who pick up their children. So she was requesting a sidewalk be put in there. And I was actually over there. I went to the Edina homecoming game, and I just looked how bad the conditions were of the crosswalks, and they weren't super bad, but they were definitely a little beat up, I thought. But so I don't know. Her complaint or her concerns was legitimate, I think. But in a way, I mean, it is a pretty well-marked area. I mean, there's so many signs that mark the school area and stuff. I mean, I think people driving through there would probably slow down most of the time. But I don't know.
Yes, Jack, because I forwarded that to you, and I did respond to her. And is there a sidewalk the feasibility study has been requested for? Is that on School Lane, or help me on that one?
Correct. We have been requested to look at a feasibility report for sidewalk along School Road there from Concord, wrapping around and tying into 60th Street. And then we're making the assumption that from 60th Street over to the new sidewalk that's been put on that east frontage road would be a logical connection or extension of that sidewalk. So yes, we're undertaking that this late fall and winter. We'll be coming forward with council with a recommendation for a sidewalk and what it would cost and which side it would be located on, and then extension of that would be what type of pedestrian crosswalks or additional signage may be part of that project.
So was that communicated to the resident and also to the principal of the school?
The principal of the school is aware of the operations out there and the forthcoming plans. So that should have been, but I can circle back with both of those individuals.
And help me remind me, when sidewalks, are they going to come to us before they go to the council, or go directly?
I think at this point we would say that all these sidewalk and other road improvements would be coming one stop at the ETC before they went on to the city council.
Good. Thank you for bringing that up. Bob?
I'd like to invite Haley and Stephen at a future date to bring your ideas about traffic around our schools, particularly the high school in Valley View, one of the worst traffic areas in town at certain times of the day, and if you can give a student perspective on that and things that either the school or the city might consider to make it better. It's the only place in the city of Edina where my cars have had accidents.
Were you driving?
I was not.
Thank you. Haley, did you have anything?
I don't have much to say other than I'm excited to see what happens with France Avenue, because I know updating it would be a really good idea.
Yes, I agree. Good. Thank you. Transportation Options Subcommittee, we have some new members to consider.
Yes, we've had responses to the ad that went out in the, what do you call it, ad or?
Press release?
Notice They went out in the Sun Current. I didn't make copies for everybody, but we have 4 new names, and I think what I'd like to ask at this group is just that you can have one of these, is that we just, I'd like to get approval to add these 4 new names, and then we'll be inviting everybody to come to an initial meeting and then see who wants to come and figure out what we're doing at that point. The names are Amber Cameron, David Messenberg, Linda Dannell, and Milton Adams.
I believe one of these people is with the Edina Resource Center, so that's a great connection to have. And I talked with Mr. Adams on the phone, and I really enjoyed that, and reminded me that for some people who might be involved in this group, meeting at night could be a problem because they don't drive at night. And so as much as people's needs can be accommodated that way, knowing it's hard to find a meeting time for everybody.
Right.
So do you want to move the membership, and we'll consider the membership complete for now? Is that good? Or do you want?
Yes, and I don't, and if there's other people interested, I'm assuming they could participate and they bring their names to the next meeting of the council.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to make a motion?
I make a motion that we accept the 4 additions and that we then allow us to have our first meeting on November 1st.
Awesome. Second for that? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Great, it passes. Good. I know people are excited about it. Bike Task Force, well, I said that Bike Task Force is looking at prioritizing some of the primary bike routes in the city, which are all state aid roads. They're the ones you would expect, like Cahill and 70th and Benton and Vernon. And also going through the different projects we have to make sure that we have volunteers for the projects. And it's my understanding that once they prioritize the bike routes before anything is done, they be coming to the ETC, and we would look at it in context with the other things we're looking at, like pedestrian and transit and all of that. That's my report. Paul, Grandview?
Yes, just briefly, the Grandview District Small Area Plan is moving along swiftly. We have our consultants on board. Our community workshop number 2, the second one, is coming up this next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And there is a press release included in the packet. I'd like to just make an announcement that on Tuesday, we're going to be working through 4 different sets of focus groups, and that's detailed out pretty clearly in the press release. 4 different groups: parents with school-age children is one group, seniors, educators, property owners in the Grandview area is the second group. The third group is teens, business operators in the Grandview area again, and commuters, and also empty nesters. And then the final group will be neighborhoods of Grandview, the Bike Edina Task Force, sports groups, and singles. So if you're out there and are interested in participating and having your word heard about the Grandview Small Area Plan, please consider attending. Thank you.
44th and 70th Street updates.
Thank you. Both of these projects are in the home stretch. 70th Street is has a little work to be done yet on the west end down by the church. However, that work should be done and be wrapped up in the next 2 to 3 weeks. We anticipate around the 1st of November to have pavement down out there, the final pavement, and then another week to 10 days for striping and the other activities before it kind of goes into hiatus for the winter. And in the spring, we'll be coming out with a planting plan for the boulevards and some of the landscape islands, both east side and west side of 100, and then along over by the roundabouts as well. So coming along very well. They just today started putting down the Duratherm crosswalks at the roundabout, which is where they actually heat up the asphalt and then depress down into the asphalt a stamp pattern, and then they actually melt in a plastic resin that then sits below the pavement surface, so our plows will not be able to pull that up, and wears very well. We actually have it at a couple other spots in our community. Blake Road has one, and then we have it at 70th and Metro, and then up here right behind City Hall we have another location of that. So all the pedestrian crosswalks along there will have that Duratherm product, and that's starting to go down today. 44th Street is also in its home stretch. They are, I believe, paving the final wear course on that tomorrow, and we'll be kind of wrapping up the restoration and some of the striping and other items like that that'll be going down yet this fall. So both projects are finishing about right on time and just in time for the colder weather. So looking forward to seeing both of those open to traffic in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
So I have a question about 44th quickly. The striping is, I thought, was going to wait until Wooddale is decided, or is there some kind of striping that can go down? The idea being whatever treatment is selected for Wooddale for the Bike Boulevard, that a similar might work for 44th?
Correct. I apologize. See, a lot of that share road type facilities or striping will be held off on that corridor. You're correct.
Correspondence and petitions, you know, we virtually never have anything in that section. But I wonder, would it be possible to start getting the correspondence that comes to City Hall related to traffic concerns, even if they're not going to be processed through us, if they could just be in our packet with a cover letter saying, you know, these have been handled by the Traffic Safety Committee or staff level or something, you know, would that be possible? Would that be something people would be interested in? I'm not seeing a lot of nodding. Go ahead.
Are you suggesting when they get the initial inquiries, or rather than now we get them after they've kind of dealt with them and they've, you know, let us know what staff recommends?
Having not seen them, I don't know what is in them, but, you know, very rarely an email will come to City Hall addressed specifically to us, and then we do get that, but clearly there's a lot more correspondence about traffic than what we see. It could be that people just don't know that they can address something to us. Tom, did you have a thought?
Just a thought. I think it's a difficult job of screening that at City Hall. I'm not exactly sure how that's done presently, but I think that maybe there could be someone who has some kind of a guideline given to them by you or by Jack or both, and that then would be used by the person who screens out all these calls and memos and so on and cuts it down to something that is more manageable. There's an awful lot of stuff that I'm sure is like static, and I think that shouldn't come to us. But I'm not sure how to say that.
Well, is that something, Jack, that maybe we can talk about, and you can give me an idea of what kinds of things you get and whether those are, you know, informative for us?
Yes, I'd appreciate that opportunity to maybe spend a month collecting the data to our next meeting and maybe just work with the chair to see if it's data that you believe is relevant to the commission and what we currently do to filter that data as it comes in and as it gets disseminated to the right groups. So I'd welcome that opportunity to start that discussion.
Thanks. Chair and commission member comments. Let's start with Catherine. Is that okay? And just say pass if you don't have anything.
So I just have one comment, and I don't know who to thank for this, but just recently on Gleason Road, on the overpass, the Highway 62 overpass, there have just recently been put in curb ramps in the sidewalks there. And as someone who lives on Gleason Road, I just want to say thank you. Because for the first time, I can push a stroller along the sidewalk and not have to, like, you know, bump down and bump back up. And I just wanted to say that out loud because I think it is so important how big a difference something so small can make. And for me, an able-bodied person just pushing a stroller, it was irritating. I can only imagine for the gentleman who uses a motorized wheelchair in my neighborhood, it was impossible for him to get to Bredesen without going on the street. And hopefully he's able to do that now. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Pass.
I'll pass.
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 Historical Society and their really good newsletter this month. I'm trying to find it here. Do any of you get this? It's they have a new exhibit on growing up in Edina, and how it's related to transportation is that when people are reminiscing about what they remember from childhood, they're not remembering sitting in front of the TV. They're talking about biking, riding their bike to 50th in France, and walking and playing outside. And so it's a reminder that even though we're focused on transportation, providing the sidewalks and the bike lanes and the safe ways to get to school and to parks, it's what makes childhood, for so many kids. So anyway, read it if you get it. It's really good. Staff comments.
I just have one. Before you is a draft for the request for proposal for the Living Streets policy. I would welcome any comments that you have on that policy. Be forwarded to me via email. I'm hoping to get a final draft out towards the end of next week, so that would be helpful to have you guys take a look through this, probably based on some of the discussion with the LA report that you have in front of you and some of the discussion you've had tonight with the France Avenue Complete Streets. You may help us to bolster some of this RFP, and I guess I'd welcome any comments on that.
Aylin?
Jack, will that come in print form or a attachment?
I do have it as a paper copy on your DS tonight, but I will also email it out tomorrow morning.
Okay, thanks.
And people, when you respond, please just respond not to everybody, okay? Just respond to Jack. If you want to CC me, I'd appreciate that, but don't reply to everybody with your comments, please. That's an open meeting law thing. With that, I think we are adjourned unless anybody has anything else. No? Okay, we're done. Thank you, everybody.